Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the program. It is April the 8th, 2025. These are unprecedented times. And so it's a great time for a podcast. This is the Jeff Gerstmann Show with me, Jeff Gerstmann. Hi. Hello. You can do anything at Zombo.com. How about that Nintendo Switch 2? Am I right? Woo! Woo! So we're 6 days, a little under a week after the unveiling, the full and proper unveiling of the new Nintendo platform. How's everyone feeling about it? How's everyone feeling about this stuff now that this many days have changed here? This many days. Now that we're about a week away here. It's been an interesting reaction, I think, from a lot of folks. And I don't know that this is like I guess the weird part about it is you have to sit and look at it and go like, does any of this actually matter? Because you see a lot of people kind of complaining about some of the specifics around the device. But with the world we live in, and maybe it won't be like this for much longer, right? The economic realities of the world around us, specifically here in the United States, are going to be things that maybe eventually make it so people are just like, well, I can't even think about getting one of these. But analysts are like lowering some estimates and numbers and stuff, but still saying like, yeah, they'll sell out their launch allotment. It's not going to be a big deal, at the end of the day, I think that there are enough people who are just like, they have disposable income and they have the ability to get one of these, and they will. We'll see, though. I mean, also, we're in an interesting environment here where, Nintendo has, they announced, they gave a price for the device, and said pre-orders will start the following Wednesday, which is supposed to be tomorrow. And then they waited a day. They announced their pricing information and all of this other stuff pretty much the same day that Republicans rolled out their tariffs for the world and how much they intend to charge people who were importing goods into this country, which then caused Nintendo to sit down and be like, oh, we need more. We have to delay all of this because now we have to take all of this into account, because those numbers were significantly higher than anyone anticipated. They seem fucking stupid. They seem completely misguided across the board. The goals of them feel murky. Like everything top to bottom on this tariff stuff just seems absolutely fucking bananas. I think if you look at some of the other levers you would have to pull to try to balance out world trade and look at some of the other kind of disparities there. Or if you're literally, trying to actually help American workers have more work by bringing manufacturing back into the States in a way that it, hasn't been. This is not, I think what we're looking at right now, is not the way to roll it out haphazardly and then be like, oh, well, the number of false starts we've had on this stuff. Or like, hey, we're gonna do this, and then a day later, like, oh, we're not gonna do it. It's just not a. You have to be intelligent and measured with your approach to this sort of stuff, and that's not what we have here in the States, period. Obviously there's much bigger fallout across the board for all of this other stuff. It is not just a Nintendo problem. But with the Switch 2 stuff getting announced right around the same time, and then them having to delay it and all, like it's a interesting microcosm of the bullshit that is happening, and watching a lot of, and I'm sure if you're outside the US, you would probably argue that this was not necessarily a good thing to begin with, but watching basically any soft power that America had be thrown away across the board, whether it's economic realities, economic pressures, and or what have you, or just like the fucking American propaganda machines that are have been up and running and doing things around the world for a long time. Like, that's inefficient, we got to cut all that shit. Like, it's insane to watch, because you just look at it and go like, this shit was, like, you could argue that this was a bad thing for the world, but this has been working out pretty well for America for a long time. And so watching all of it be thrown away in the name of, like, I don't even know. It's really fascinating. And like, not and terrifying. Like, it's not good. It's not like a market thing. It's not like my 401, like that matters. If you're at or near your retirement age and you watch all this money go away, you're like, oh, I worked my entire life for something, but like, these people are also talking about, taking your Social Security away and all this other stuff too. So it's it's a real weird, dumb time right now. Like I said, it's not necessarily something that is just affecting the Nintendo Switch 2, but watching the Switch 2 kind of walk face first into this with all of the other stuff that's already going on, all of the things that are already like surrounding the Switch that make it feel bad, that are giving people bad feeling, is really interesting to see as well, kind of on top of all of that. And so, I say all that to because I think there are some people that are writing this. I was like, oh, the kids aren't getting their Switch 2s and now they're mad. It's like, no, this stuff is fucking bad across the board. Like the Switch 2 and what will end up happening to it, pricing wise, or we'll see. Maybe this stuff all gets mitigated. I think the dumbest part about all this is that, like, you look at it and go like, even in the face of like a lot of like, oh no, we're serious, we're rolling out these tariffs and we're rolling out these penalties and this and that, like, there's still every possibility that tomorrow rolls around and it's like, oh yeah, no, we're on the phone talking it out, we're negotiating. Like, it's real. Yeah, it's a fucking bad way to run shit. Even if you wanted to do this, even if this was like, oh, we found a good reason to actually roll this type of thing out, this is not the way to do it. I don't need to be an economist to know that. So yeah, the Switch 2. An hour-long presentation that they spent talking about the system and some of the games, a lot of third-party games. Really, I think the kind of unscathed part of this, the part that you look at and no one is really kind of questioning or messing with this, has been like the strong kind of third-party presence at this thing. It's been a bright spot in the rest of it being kind of weird, around whether it's the system itself or the cost of Mario Kart or whatever. It's been you haven't really seen a lot of people kind of talking trash about the third party presentation, which it was abundant and interesting, I guess I would say. The sorts of things that you look at and go like, well, these are going to be some good opportunities for us to get a read on just how powerful is the Switch 2, what sort of performance can we expect out of it, because you Nintendo's games are rarely pushing things, or rather, like, they are building their hardware and they know how to build their software in the range of their hardware, and so on and so forth, and that's just kind of the types of things that they make, and you've come to expect that over the years. Whereas the third-party performance and the third-party presentation on some of this stuff has been, dicey over the years when we go back through the Switch 1 catalog and the Switch 1 library and some of the third-party games and how they ran or didn't run there. You'll get, like, I think with stuff like Cyberpunk getting announced and Civ 7 and some of these other multi-platform games, Tony Hawk 3 and 4, you'll start to kind of get a read on where this comes in, and Digital Foundry, I think, has done a really good job. We'll get into that when we really kind of dig into this. A good job of kind of trying to piece together what they know about the specs, because it's not like Nintendo is out there saying, here's what this is, here's exactly what this chip is, and here's the comparison point. That's not really what Nintendo has ever been about. And so Digital Foundry has kind of been picking apart some of the leaked information, as well as some of the stuff that Nintendo has said itself, and trying to piece together, like, okay, this is probably where they're at in terms of what this thing is capable of. I mean, the boilerplate kind of, I think the shorthand version of it has been like, it's somewhere around a PlayStation 4 performance wise. That's been what people have been saying for a while, and it seems like when you kind of go through the numbers, that's not too far off from what we're getting. There'll be some push and pull on that, obviously, because they're going to be able to do some form of DLSS inside of the Switch 2. So they'll hit 4K. They will occasionally be able to hit 120 on some of these games as well. We'll see how many games actually can run at 120. That's one of my things to watch over the next few years here. How many games actually support that stuff, and how that will all go. Let's take a break, and we'll get into we'll get into some of those specs right after this. Be right back. All right, let's check in. What's going on with the hair? What's happening? You happy with it? Is it receding? Is it not where you want it to be? Well, close your eyes and imagine what you could look like 6 months from now. How's it look? Does it look the same? Does it look worse? All right. Now think about how it could look if you started using Hims. If you're picturing the same you as before, but with thicker and fuller hair, you'd be correct. Hims provides you with convenient access to a range of hair loss treatments that work, all from the comfort of your couch. That makes treating hair loss simple, because Hims has doctor-trusted options and clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. Choose from personalized chewable, oral, spray, and serum treatments to find what works best for you. This whole process is simple, and the whole thing is done 100% online. There's no uncomfortable doctor's visits or anything like that. You just answer a few questions, and a medical provider will determine if a treatment is right for you. If you're prescribed, your treatment is sent directly to you for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, and they can help you get your confidence back too, with visibly thicker and fuller hair. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/Jeff. That's HIMS.com/Jeff. For your personalized hair loss treatment options, hims.com/Jeff. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. Okay. So yeah, in terms of playing games and stuff like that, I've been playing some Blueprints. I don't have too much to say about, like, I feel like I haven't gotten to whatever point in Blueprints that people are talking about, because people keep talking about it like it's the greatest game ever made, and But it's got all this like a hidden, like it's got so much in it, and this and that, and I've been playing it, maybe not a ton of it, but I've been playing it, and I got to some stuff last night that was like, okay, there's some interesting, more logic, like there's some cool like logic puzzles here. It's more than just plopping down rooms. It's more than that logic to it, and that stuff has been fun and good, but you know, there's already been some repetition on some of that. And so I'm hoping that it sounds like that there's a lot more to it that I just haven't gotten to yet, which, you know, there's certainly like a lot of, like, if you leave the house and wander around, there's a lot of doors and things that you can't open and keys that you don't have and whatever. It's funny though. If you kind of walk out of the house and walk around, you'll find like a locked gate that's locked with a combination lock. And the gate is maybe waist high. And there's a big tree stump right next to it that if you were a thinking man, you could stand on the tree stump and hop over that stupid fence. But you can't, because it's not that kind of game. And you know, and there's just like little stuff like that I just look at and go like, maybe you should. I mean, maybe don't put the stump there for one, and then maybe this fence could have been taller to at least give the appearance of why I can't just walk over it. Like maybe I'm just too tall in real life, because it's just like it looks like something that I could just like step over and just be like, all right, let's keep going. But Blueprints is really it seems very interesting, and but I haven't gotten to whatever. I don't know. Like I've done some logic puzzles and with dartboards and boxes and everything, and you find interesting new rooms and security cameras and lies and truth and all this other stuff that, you know, I guess if you were bad at remembering things, you would write some of that down. But I haven't found anything that has inspired me to pull out a notebook and start taking notes, because it just hasn't seemed like that kind of game yet. And so I think what that says is that, you know, there's probably a lot more for me to play, which is exciting, because I do think it's like the core premise of it is you are walking around a house, and every time you open a door, you draft what the room you're walking into is going to be from a preset selection of, like, it'll give you 3 random things and be like, oh, do you want one here? Do you want this room, or this room? And if you pick the wrong rooms, or if you get a bad pull of rooms, it might be a room with no doors, and so you're like, okay, well, I can't go this way, and I need to turn around and try to find another path, and or you may just be cut off. And when you are cut off, or when you run out of steps because you can only walk around so much during the day, you then have to call it a day. And when you reset and go to the next day, the entire house is wiped, and you plop down pieces all over again. And so as you go through the days, you're uncovering new types of rooms that you can plop down, and that will give you different resources and so on. And I think that there's some really interesting stuff there, but that part of it would not be enough to carry a full game. So like as you start encountering more and more kind of logic puzzles and like, hey, what the heck is going on here? Like it does entice. But if there's a hook in this game, I haven't seen it yet. And so that's been I'm excited to see more of it because of how everyone has been falling all over themselves about it. But I don't but like, well, wait a minute, because I haven't read anything specific about what is in there. It's just like people are I've just seen people ranting about how many notes they've had to take and all of this other stuff. So I don't want to go read, you know, in case anyone has spoiled what the true nature of that game is or something. But I hope it's more than sometimes there's a dartboard, because I don't need a notebook to figure out the dartboard puzzle. Okay. Anyway, I've been playing some other stuff. It's all stuff I can't talk about just yet. Like yesterday was a big day for video games coming in, and so I'm like redeeming codes and going like, all right, cool. Oh wait, yeah, I can't talk about this for like a couple of weeks, but yes. So I'll have more to say about video games this week and every week. The Switch 2 Again, pre-orders were supposed to begin this week. They are not. That is kind of the upshot. The original announced price of the device is $450 for a like core model, base model, and then a bundle with Mario Kart World that would be $499. I think on its face, I like nothing about that price really struck me funny. That is pretty much exactly the price that I think and just about everyone was predicting for it, that it would be somewhere in this range. So like that aspect of it doesn't seem necessarily bad. Now, of course, you know that these pre-orders have been delayed due to the tariff situation here in the States and the different parts that are assembled in different parts of the world and whatever else may end up impacting that price. So it sounds like Nintendo is assessing what impact these tariffs will have on their sales or their ability to bring consoles into this country, and they will adjust accordingly. This morning, Canadian pre-orders were also delayed. They've said this is strictly as a timing issue, as to kind of keep North America all lined up for all of its pre-orders, which sucks for Canada. And also, I think probably, helps with scalpers and Americans trying to steal Canadian pre-orders and whatever else. Like they already started taking pre-orders in the United Kingdom, and I was looking at that and going like, shit, should I? Fuck, man. How does that work? What do I got? So, but presumably the Canadian pre-order situation is because a lot of those shipments are probably tied together. I don't know. Maybe Nintendo doesn't ship consoles directly into Canada. Maybe they just have one North American drop off, and some of them make their way up to Canada after or not. I don't know what the actual normal process for that is. If they're if there's a boat going into Vancouver or whatever, the couve, if you will. Everyone calls it that, right? Right. So they have said that they are not looking to delay the launch date of the console, which is June 5th. So what they're saying right now is pre-orders have been delayed. The console has not been delayed. We will have more details later. And that's kind of where we're at with it. It's a bad spot to be in. A lot of retailers have at least created products in their database for this stuff. And some of them, have hastily updated their information to say pre-orders begin blah, 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 to remove the date from it. And in some cases remove the pricing from it, because that is something that is likely to change. I mean, that's the only reason you would delay this stuff, right? Is if you were looking at it and going like, oh, we can't sell this for $450 anymore because we now have to pay X number of dollars to bring it in, period, to this country, and like that's not going. We're not going to do that, and so it's likely, if everything sticks, if all of this actually goes the way that people are saying it's going to, and it doesn't just end up being some fucking dumb game of chicken or whatever fucking stupid shit is happening here. If these tariffs roll out and are enacted, it is incredibly likely that you will see a more expensive Nintendo Switch 2, along with everything else. Those scalper prices for 5090s looking a little better these days, huh? Now it's like they'll all be $4,000. Huh? Who's excited? Let's get graphics cards. What are we doing? No? All right. Well, all right. Okay. So yeah, that'll end up impacting the price to varying degrees depending on where they're manufacturing stuff. I mean, they're I believe they're doing Switch 2 stuff out of Vietnam, and the Vietnam tariffs ended up being higher than anyone anticipated they would be, and it's a fucking mess. So is this thing going to come in at $600 by the time they're done? $650? Like what are we actually looking at here? It's a bad situation. It's a bad situation. And we just have to kind of wait and see how that stuff's going to go, because that's also stuff that could turn on a dime, right? I mean, if there's anything you could say about, well, there's a lot of things you could say about this presidency and all of that sort of stuff. But if there's anything you could say, it has been this herky-jerky horse shit of not committing to anything, of like rolling this thing out and then going like, oh, wait, everyone hates this. We're going to, the TikTok ban, we're pushing that back another 75 days, which they also did. Because apparently there was a deal on the table to actually solve the TikTok situation once and for all. And then when all of these tariffs came in, apparently it blew up that entire deal. If you believe what has been written about that. And so the nature of this is so fucking, you have to look at it and go like, well, are we going to put a bunch of Switch 2s on a boat and then we're just going to have that boat sit somewhere in international waters and then we're going to wait? And as soon as they say we're not rolling out the tariffs, dock that fucking boat. Is that what they're going to do? I think there are already like rules in place for how tariffs are assessed based on when a boat leaves and all that other stuff. I do believe that some of that stuff is already. I think there is some logic to that part of it. But yes, like how does this? Yeah, how does this actually impact things? Yeah, it's a fucking mess. And it's funny because like the Switch 2 stuff was already kind of a mess. Like before any of this stuff came up, before any of the tariff news, like I think people looked at some of the pricing and thought like, oh, are they pricing it based on what they think the tariff situation is going to be? And Nintendo has come out and said, no, they are not doing that. So that's fun. In terms of the hardware itself, Nvidia has put out a post talking about a little bit of some of the bells and whistles that their GPU, that their hardware provides to the Switch 2. That it will have dedicated RT cores and tensor cores, and so this will kind of afford it the ability to have DLSS based on Digital Foundry's breakdown of that chip and what it's likely to have on it. There will still be performance costs associated with DLSS. They don't have enough stuff in it to just kind of get that upscaling for free. So there is a little bit of a push and pull with that. But yeah, tensor cores will boost AI-powered graphics while keeping power consumption efficient. RT cores enhance in-game realism with dynamic lighting and natural reflections. Variable refresh rate via Nvidia G-Sync and handheld mode ensures ultra-smooth, tear-free gameplay. Those are the bullet points that Nvidia is giving alongside the announcement of the Switch 2. I mean, the reality of this is going to be kind of a weird, like, okay, they say the new RT cores bring real-time ray tracing, delivering lifelike lighting, reflections, and shadows for more immersive worlds. And you're like, yeah, but that's not. Is that going to be the most efficient and best way to use this hardware as a game developer? Or are you going to go like, well, we've got to get our ray tracing in there when we know that ray tracing has not necessarily been a great performant technology, or, it's getting better every generation, but it's typically not been great thus far. Eurogamer's Digital Foundry has done a full-on breakdown of the T239, which is the Nvidia chip inside of the Switch 2, and they have since confirmed with what we're talking about here that there is no DLA, there's no deep learning accelerator in here, so all DLSS processes have to run on the tensor cores, which will then have a performance impact. They're kind of, their comparison points here. They're pulling another Nvidia chip called the Nvidia T234 that is a mobile component that's been used in other devices. I want to say it showed up in some cars. I'm not sure where the T234 has been deployed at this point, but they do have good specs on that and kind of what that is all about. And then they've pulled a 2050, an RTX 2050, and shown some of the specs from that. as like their three kind of like, okay, here's the T239 that's inside the Switch 2, here's a 2050, and here's a T234, and kind of showing kind of the range of specs across them, and like it's kind of, you know, there's certainly some similarities there, for sure. You know, we don't necessarily, they're all based on the same Ampere architecture. The Switch 2 has 1536 CUDA cores, whereas the 2050 and the T234 have 2048. And some of this stuff is they're looking to verify. So it's obviously a lot of this is based on not official information. Nintendo has not necessarily put out a spec sheet, and Nvidia has not put out a spec sheet for the T239. So they are kind of going off of whether it's having talked to developers or some of the details have leaked along the way in terms of like memory bandwidth and the GPU clocks and stuff. So docked, what they're hearing, but have not been able to independently verify, is that the clock is 1 gigahertz when docked, 561 megahertz when undocked. But the CPU goes from 998 megahertz when docked to 1101 megahertz when mobile. So you're kind of like, you know, you're clocking the GPU way down when you undock, but you're clocking the CPU up a little bit. I think the thing to keep in mind here, alongside all of this stuff, you know, it's easy to get lost in the price and performance discussion, but you know, as we talk about handhelds, and this is something that I've had to kind of keep in mind as we start to talk more and more about Steam Deck and Steam Deck competitors and some of the other handhelds that have hit the market, is that there's a lot of thought put into battery life and how many watts is this thing going to put out on a regular basis, and how many, you know, how big of a battery can they cram into this thing before it gets too big and too bulky. And so they are always kind of pushing and pulling on how much power can we generate, how much heat can we dissipate, how much battery life can we have. And so like getting those three things to be harmonious in a way that still delivers a pleasing video game experience, that's where the magic lies, right? Like that's kind of the, you know, one of the cool things about the Steam Deck, and, you know, like some other devices have pushed on that a little bit and said, oh, we're going to put a bigger battery in it, it's going to be heavier. You've had some other devices that have been like, oh, well, you know, our battery life sucks shit, and so on and so forth. And so, you know, different mindsets and different mentalities are going to result in slightly different outcomes on that. Conceptually, obviously, they're also dealing with, you know, different parts and different architectures and all of that stuff along the way, because, you know, all of those other handhelds just about are using AMD parts. The upshot of all of this is, you know, that there's, again, the kind of the shorthand version of this is that you can expect something around a PS4 level performance out of it. That will vary depending on whether you're docked or undocked. Obviously, when it is a 1080p screen, but when you are docked, it can put out 4K. You know, how is that going to look? Is that going to be upscaled? Like, what is that whole thing going to? How is all of that going to look? Is it going to look like a really kind of chunky 4K because we're just kind of upscaling it quickly without using too much GPU? I mean, and maybe that ends up being a game by game basis sort of scenario. What we do know is that we're kind of seeing things like Cyberpunk 2077 and Star Wars Outlaws coming to the platform. And it will be fascinating to see how well those games run. Cyberpunk, of course, is a game that over the course of its 8,000 patches and updates designed to fix it and add features and everything else, that game has turned into even more. It has turned into the technical showpiece that they wanted it to be out of the gate, where they're kind of looking at it and going like, okay, what can we do? You know, so the Switch 2 version ends up potentially being a fascinating case of like, what bells and whistles do they turn on and which ones do they leave off, and you know, what's going to hit them the hardest on performance, and how good can they get that thing looking. Obviously, the, you know, ridiculous path traced lighting stuff that got added to Cyberpunk kind of later in its life that is awesome to look at and fascinating to see. I don't think that that'll make its way to the Switch 2. That's just a guess. I also don't know that I would want to play a game like Cyberpunk 2077 rather, on a Switch 2. But that's your mileage may vary. Star Wars Outlaws also, being a relatively recent game and something that, was one of the games that made me think, maybe it's time for me to upgrade because it was just not running great. And not that it's some technical powerhouse. It may very well be a case of, optimization and what have you, but it was a thing that made me like kind of start to look at my CPU and go like, maybe it's time. And so seeing how that game runs on the Switch 2 will be interesting, and it's not an apples to apples comparison with a lot of the handhelds. You can kind of look at some of the parts and wattages and all this other stuff and try to do like baseline, like, oh, it's going to be, maybe a little bit more powerful than a Steam Deck. But the situation here is that, because it is a custom part, it is all custom made. It is not running, especially some of these other devices that are running Windows in the background of all of this. Famously bloat-free Windows, famously processes. It just, that they are a little bit closer to the metal on a Switch 2 than they probably are on a lot of these other kind of handheld PCs. And so that probably provides them with a little more room to optimize and a little more room to, kind of bring improvements to this device that they wouldn't necessarily always be able to do or in some cases be willing to do for the Steam Deck. Speaking of the Steam Deck for a minute, it has been interesting to see how well the Steam Deck has been supported and picked up by a variety of developers, like Sony for one. It seems like that they have been very interested to try to get Steam Deck verification for their games. But also, I guess I just want to note that like they put out a patch for Assassin's Creed Shadows earlier this week. I guess it was earlier this week. And they called out a lot of platform specific fixes for the game. And they broke out Steam Deck separately to say, hey, we've, it was something like, oh, you weren't able to see targets from 80 meters away on Steam Deck. We updated that. We fixed that. So it's very interesting to see more and more developers targeting Steam Deck fixes specifically instead of it being just like, oh, well, if it runs, it runs. I don't know. Valve's doing all the work on Proton, Proton 9's a hell of a thing, I guess. I don't know. We're just making games over here. Like, to see people on the development side, on the game side, not just on Valve's side, working to make that a better experience, I think gives me a lot of hope for this whole category beyond the Switch, which has obviously been extremely successful. But like the seeing developers that are very interested in trying to address that market, even though the market of Steam Deck owners is still relatively small compared to every other platform they develop for. It's heartening and interesting to see like, okay, cool. Like they're actually taking this stuff seriously. And they're treating it like it's in some cases, treating it like it's its own platform and looking at fixes specifically for that instead of just saying like, here's what we fixed on PC. And some of it will pertain to the Steam Deck, I guess. I thought that was cool. And I would love to see more developers do that as we get deeper and deeper into this handheld thing. Because that's something that, once the other consoles dive into this space with their own devices, it's going to be real weird all over again with a lot of this. And so, Digital Foundry goes on to kind of talk a little bit about wattage, and this is from Richard Ledbetter, who's, been doing great tech coverage there for a good long time. But, in terms of wattage and consumption and all of that stuff, he's saying, like, I've seen a Steam Deck consuming up to 28 watts of power. Meanwhile, the Switch 2, with its GPU clock and CPU clock, based on a 20 watt hour battery with a minimum of 2 hours battery life, It'll be sipping a maximum 10 watts of power during play, almost 1/3 of the Steam Deck's consumption. No matter how much more efficient the Switch 2 architecture may or may not be, it's hard to believe that the Nintendo machine in handheld mode can beat the deck in terms of raw horsepower. But of course, like, you know, then he goes on to talk about what I was saying about, you know, kind of bespoke development and, you know, like being a little bit closer to the metal and all of that, as opposed to, you know, a Steam Deck, which is, you know, getting games to pretend to fooling games into thinking they're running on Windows when they're not, and all of that other stuff. DLSS, of course, it will be a thing, and you know, we'll see what that does for those games on the platform. As far as the rest of the hardware, pretty much what you would expect based on a lot of the leaks and based on a lot of the conversations we've been having for the past few months here. The C button, which everyone spent a lot of time speculating about, is for chat. It is underwhelming, I guess I would say. It is not. They're building video chat into the Switch 2. They're building Xbox Live level features from 2 generations ago into the Switch 2. With some not just that, but you know, like they spent a good long time on this thing and said, like, you can video chat with other people, and they showed like it almost looks like if you've ever watched someone stream their screen in Discord, you know, the top 2/3 of the screen, you know, are you playing your game, which is not always how the Discord thing goes. You're watching whatever bootleg video you're all watching together. And then on the bottom, you'll see each individual's camera or their user icon if their camera's off or whatever. And so that's exactly what it looks like. They have a situation where you can stream your gameplay to other players and superimpose yourself over the footage, like, you know, like all the fancy streamers be doing. They will sell their own camera. You can, apparently it will also have something of support for just, you know, regular USB webcams. We'll have to wait and see kind of how robust that support actually is. In the video that they showed, the frame rate on your screen shared video stuff is trash. It's like super low I mean, you know, and it's to be expected because, you know, it's a handheld fucking device. So the frame rate on it is very low, and you know, like it's not something where you're gonna watch and watch it like it was a Twitch stream or something like that. Like the frame rate was highly compromised. They have got background noise removal in them. Like basically, they, you know, I wonder if how much of this is just Nvidia's technology repurposed. Because you know, they will have background removal for your camera, and they will have background noise removal on the microphone. There's a lot of different ways to kind of tackle that specific type of technology, but it does look quite a bit like you know, the Nvidia broadcast feature set. But also, if it's the Nvidia broadcast feature set, that is something that probably takes a little bit more from a performance standpoint than you would get otherwise. So whatever. The reason they're doing all the frame rate stuff is, again, you know, it's performance stuff. Like if they had 4 full frame rate video feeds coming into your system, if you were streaming a full frame rate video feed out to the internet while playing on a handheld device, like the Switch 2 is not powerful enough to do all of that. Like it's just not. So, you know, it makes sense that they would not compromise your gameplay experience on that stuff. And, you know, like it kind of is what it is. But all of that adds up to, it is what it is. It's you know, it doesn't look like a great voice chat and video chat experience. Also, they're building in features that people have kind of not really wanted in a console for a good long time. It feels like the social experience on console is very different than it was 20 years ago, but like literally they showed Uno running on a Switch 2 as a part of all of this, which is funny because it's like they built iToy or Xbox Live Vision cameras or whatever, and it's very weird. It's very, it just feels like a very backwards kind of late to the party, like, oh, you're building this into your device like years after people have said that they don't really want it anymore. And maybe a fresh generation of children will want to have video and voice. I mean, my daughter gets on FaceTime. She steals my phone and runs away to FaceTime with a friend of hers from school sometimes, and they love it. So I guess maybe if you were doing that while playing a video game, then maybe that would actually be fun. But again, then that gets into the parental, like, and do I want kids doing this with their friends list? And the answer is, like, it's a parental controls sort of situation, right? It's like, okay, how are you going to approve? And they mentioned that very briefly in the in the video of, like, hey, you can approve these video chats or not as they come in to make sure that your kids aren't getting weird on the internet with strangers. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like, especially if it's something that is compromising the screen size when you are in handheld mode. Like, I would want, if I was playing a video game, let's assume it's Fortnite. I would not want to sacrifice the bottom third of my screen to other people's choppy frame rate Fortnite when I need to see and win. Like, I'm not focusing on their videos. I want to shoot people, but whatever. Kids have better eyes than I do. And, and you don't have to have that view. You can use it like regular voice chat without the video. So, like a built-in as a system level feature, like you just look at it and go like, oh, this is like standard stuff that everyone's kind of been doing for a long time. And having Nintendo try to focus on it, like, look at this thing we did, is like, yeah, great. Welcome to 2006. It was really kind of silly to see them tout their implementation here, and also ahead of the reveal try to, like, have these like little videos of the C button being pressed as like, oh, it's a mystery. It's like, yeah, it's voice chat. Like, whatever, man. Like, it doesn't. This is not you can't hang your hat on this. And it's one of the things that, when they go over the bullet points on, like, here's what the Switch 2 does, that's one of the things they have to focus on because it doesn't do that much else. All right. We'll talk about the Joy-Cons. Let's take another break. We'll come back. We'll talk about the Hall effect sticks or lack thereof, and some other stuff about the Joy-Cons as we continue to work our way through all of this Switch 2 info. Hey, if you're out there on the job, in the field, on your feet, all day, you know the value of a good pair of boots and how hard it can be to find the right pair. You get a pair, it'll disintegrate in 3 months, or hey, this steel toe didn't work out. Like, this is just, finding a great pair of boots can be a real mess. That's where Brunt comes in. Brunt work boots are durable, and they're also comfortable. So if you're going to be on your feet all day, they're not going to destroy your feet. And that's handy. We got the O-Man boot here. It's a best-selling boot, and it checks every single box. It's lightweight, water-resistant, slip and oil-resistant, heat-resistant, and electrical hazard rated. You can have durable work boots, but they're also comfortable. Join the over 500,000 other customers in a pair of Brunts. They'll let you try the boots on to the job, risk-free. All the products have free shipping. These boots are not only built for the toughest job sites, they're completely, they're waterproof. The Marin work boots, totally waterproof. If there's rain, mud, standing water, your feet will stay dry. The Marin 6-inch soft toe is built for workers across a variety of trades. So if you're on an oily workshop floor, working on cars, crawling under cars, getting up from cars, or if you're out in a muddy field, or anywhere in between, Brunt's got the boots for you. It's not just about work boots. They got a full range of high-performance gear built for tough jobs, heavy-duty work pants, weather-resistant jackets, some nice thick hoodies. You get out on a shop floor first thing in the morning, That cement is ice cold. The whole shop is ice cold. Sometimes you just, you gotta wear something and stay warm. Brunt designs durable, reliable workwear to keep you protected and productive in any condition. And Brunt knows they have the best boots on the planet, so they'll let you try any of their products on the job risk-free. Brunt didn't just make a durable work boot. They reinvented comfort for the hardest workers out there. For a limited time, you can get $10 off at Brunt by using the code JeffG at checkout. Just head to bruntworkwear.com and use the code JeffG and you're all set. Even better, Brunt lets you try all the products on the job, risk-free. After you buy them, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Hey, let them know. Let them know we sent you, huh? Brunt, they got the boots. So Joy-Cons, there was a lot of discussion. So, they let the press ask them some questions in roundtable format at various locations around the world. I think there were some people were in Paris. And I saw the question come up a few different times from a few different outlets about the technology used on the analog sticks on the Joy-Cons themselves. Now, if you remember, the Joy-Cons on the original Switch were oftentimes unreliable, prone to drift as they wore in. Some might say they were terrible or garbage. Personally, I never had a single problem with stick drift on any of the 2 or 3 sets of Joy-Cons that I had over the years, but very understandable that this was a common problem, something that they had to address and to try to do a repair program for and so on. So naturally, people want to know, what'd you do to the sticks this time? Are they Hall effect sticks? Because everyone wants to use Hall effect sticks now, which the Hall effect is a magnetic technology that is resistant to that type of drift. And so it kind of mitigates this issue. Hall effect sticks don't seem that much more expensive than traditional sticks, pots or whatever you're using in there. But it does use a little bit more power. Some people are using TMR sticks now, which is a whole electromagnetic thing that is also available. So that technology is ongoing. And so I actually bought this. Oh, I can't lift it up without it making Windows connection noises. But so, this is not your computer doing this. This is mine. I bought one of these 8-bit dough ultimates that has TMR sticks on it because I was curious about TMR technology. The sticks, in terms of the accuracy and everything on them, makes a lot of sense. I will say, however, in this case, I think that the plasticky nature of the feel of these analog sticks on this 8-bit, I think it kind of sucks. I think that aspect, and the D-pad feels very weird. I feel like I'm hitting diagonals when I'm not trying to. It's not great. Anyway. A few opportunities for outlets to try to ask questions about the nature of the sticks themselves. And every single one, this is my interview tip for the week. If you are interviewing someone and you want to know if they fixed some shit and you want to actually try to get them to answer it, do not frame the question in, hey, your old shit was fucked. Remember you almost had a legal situation around the old shit? That shit was bad. Is this new shit better? Is it using Hall effect 6? Do not frame it that way. Go with the positive aspects of it. Comfort them into the like. I'm not saying don't ask the question, but I'm saying don't put them in a position where they have to potentially talk about something that was almost like a legal, that they had to maybe face class action suits or something. Like don't remind them of that. People will connect the dots. You can connect the dots in your transcript of the interview that you run later. And say, hey, we were trying to, like in the nature of the stick drift issue that they had, we asked that, you can still bring that up after the fact. You do not need to their faces, say, hey, your shit was fucking busted. Is it not busted now? Are you using Hall Effect? And specifically, are you using Hall Effect 6 to fix this? Every answer, and Nintendo, like, you know, on their side of things, gave the dodgiest answers they possibly could, because all of the questions were, are you using Hall Effect sticks? And every answer they gave was like, we've redesigned the sticks completely. They glide so smooth, we call them smooth gliding stick. You know, like they had these fucking terrible answers that didn't answer the question, because the way the question was framed pinned them down in a way that they are not trying to get about damn near anything. I don't know if you noticed, but like, they just announced this thing, and they're going to announce what they announce, and they're not going to always want to go into dramatic detail about everything else. So if you want to get this information out of them, you kind of have to find a smoother way, a smoother talking way to do it. And so framing your question as, boy, your shit sucked before, is not going to get you what you want. Is not going to get you the answer you want. That said, they are not using Hall Effect sticks. And so, you know, like this basically, like, again, asking the question this way led to them having to talk very much around it, because otherwise the answer is no. And that doesn't sound good either. It still doesn't sound good, because all they're saying is like, and you have to assume that, like, they're aware, right? Of like, hey, we really had problems with these fucking sticks. We need to make sure this isn't a problem again, because it's going to cost us money. Like, presumably they went into this, you know, like trying to not have to deal with the Joy-Con drift issue for another generation. But they did not solve it in the way that you thought they would, which is, you know, using Hall Effect sticks, which, with the magnets that they use to, you know, like, with the magnets they use to dock the Joy-Cons onto the side of the device, maybe that would have been an issue. My understanding, after talking to Will Smith about it and also reading up on it a little bit, is it sounds like that Hall Effect sticks can work in the presence of other magnets. But I wonder if it's something where, like, oh, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, if that's a weird situation. Anyway. So there was a lot of confusion about this, because they were being very dodgy about the answer to these, like, kind of loaded questions. And eventually we did get the detail here. Nintendo Life pinned down Nate Bildorf about it, and the quote that he gave, he's the senior VP of product development and publishing. Nate's been there forever. He says, they're not Hall Effect sticks, but they feel really good, which is not an awesome answer. It is, you know, that was part of a larger answer. He says the Joy-Con 2 controllers have been designed from the ground up. I like both the Joy-Cons and the Pro Controller, but that Pro Controller, for some reason, the first time he goes on to liken the new Pro Controller to that it reminds him of a GameCube controller, which, okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Hall Effect sticks are the end all be all either. They do fix that specific problem of drift, but there are multiple ways to target that issue if you're going out of your way to design for it. So I can't necessarily say like, oh, this is going to be a problem all over again. But also, you know, it would, I think everyone would feel a little more at ease if Nintendo had gone with like different and proven technology on that front and said like, okay, we went with this and it's not a problem anymore. Instead, it's more of a trust us, bro. We've redesigned it. And they're not saying trust us, they won't drift. They're saying we redesigned it, which, you know, doesn't, you know, given their track record with the original Joy-Cons, it doesn't feel awesome. But it is what it is, I guess. You know, like, again, I guess the thing I'd say about all of this stuff is that they're doing what they can to keep costs down. That's something that you look at with the the GPU. It's something that you'll look at with these sticks, and it's something that you'll look at across the board, is that all of these things are being made and optimized and done in ways that help keep the cost down. So it's easy to say like, oh, they should just throw TMRs in here and be done with it. And then you look at the cost of goods for what a TMR part costs, versus more traditional Joy-Cons. Also, is there additional power consumption? Like, what are the other things that kind of happen there? What are the knock-on effects of going with that type of technology? All of that adds up in ways that are detrimental to other parts of the experience. And so, they're going to make the best calls they feel they can make based on the budget and whatever else that they're trying to accomplish. The thing they are doing is they are allowing you to take your Joy-Cons, undock them, and put them down on their side and use them like it was a mouse. They had a game called Drag and Drive to showcase this, which is a wheelchair basketball game. And so you're kind of using you're moving it on the surface to kind of turn. It's not entirely unlike the mech control thing that I was talking about a few weeks ago of like, oh, if you use two of these, could you kind of steer like a tank or do mouse stuff like a tank or a mech or something? Like it is kind of that. But also you have the gameplay of like lifting one up to shoot the ball, which is kind of a neat concept of like, oh, wow, look at that. You can plop these on the table and then pick it up and throw it. And I think that's cool. That's a potentially new experience that you're not getting anywhere else, I will say. And so, if developers use that and do interesting things with it, I think that's really cool. Of course, they also didn't show the mouse in any other environment than a white fucking table. And how many of you just have a table nearby while you're gaming? That's kind of one of the problems with this conceptually. My understanding is that the accuracy and the sensor that they're using is something that they have. There are people there that have put it on their pants and used it that way, sitting down or even standing up in some cases, and that is not a use case that they have showed directly, but it is something that I think you will be able to do. How comfortable that will be might depend on your pants. If you're wearing stiff pants, maybe that's a problem. Will it work on bare skin? That's the question. The nude gamer wants to know. Hey, your last console was terrible about playing it naked. Is this one going to be better when I'm naked or what? Well, we've redesigned the console in a lot of great ways, and it's going to feel really great on your skin. But so the other kind of input that the Joy-Cons will have when you are using them as a mouse that I had not considered is you can twist them. So it's not just the sensor moving in all directions the way a normal mouse would. It's not just picking them up and using them for other kind of motion control-y sort of things. It is also, what if you rotate it? And again, I think that those are like fascinating inputs that we don't really see on any other device. And so I think that's cool. On a long list of things that are maybe hard to swallow about the Switch 2, I will say that I think that stuff is really neat. They showed Civ 7. That's a game that'll have... It has mouse support on other platforms. So, they will make a mouse-based UI for all of that on the Switch 2, as well as, having to do a kind of a console-based UI for it, I'm sure. So I think all that stuff, I think that aspect of it, I think the mouse kind of stuff is really neat. Let's see. When it comes to all the pricing stuff, The Verge has some quotes from Doug Bowser, who's the president of Nintendo America. A lot of people kind of assumed that this was going to be tariff related, that the existing prices that they were using were about the tariffs. But, you know, they did say, you know, like there was no direct impacts, as any previous tariffs were not factored into the price itself, which is what Bowser said to The Verge. Again, I don't think that $449 price point is out of the question. And I think that for a few different reasons. I think the thing you need to remember as we're talking about hardware pricing, especially software pricing, is a different story. And I think that some of that is straight fucking bonkers. And I don't think I agree with some of their strategy around software pricing. That said, the existing Switch right now, the Switch 1, if you will, if you want an OLED Switch, it's $350. A regular old Nintendo Switch, just like they made them a zillion years ago when they came out, those were $299 currently. A PlayStation 5, if you want a slim PS5, which is the current regular model of the PS5, it's $500, just like it was when that thing launched. Xbox Series X pricing has changed a little bit, but not that much. This generation is largely is really unlike the generations that came before it on that front. Normally, we see price cuts, and we see price cuts that lead to a redesign. We see like, oh, here's our slim version of the console that lets us get away with charging less for the device, and now we're turning a profit on them. We weren't for the first 2 years, and blah, blah, blah. Like, remember that at some point, Sony looked at some of the exchange rates and some of the kind of, money around the world and actually raised the price of the PlayStation 5 in some territories. Microsoft tried to address this by having a lower price version of the console out of the gate with the Series S. Sony stuck to a very standard strategy like they did from last generation, where they had planned for a pro version of the console to be more expensive or whatever down the line. And so now they're selling a $700 PlayStation 5 Pro. Now think about that environment, and now think about a Switch 2. When you've got Switches on the market for $350, you can't sell a Switch 2 for $350 without completely destroying your Switch 1 business, which will destroy itself over time, but is still kind of there. They've also said that they intend to continue to support the Switch 1. They gave an answer, actually, that was like, it's like in the neighborhood of, if you don't want to Switch 2, we have a console for you, and it's called the Switch 1. Like, it was almost that answer. Not great. Not amazing optics in the grand scheme. But like, this is the scenario. Like, this is where we are now, right? And I think the Switch 2 is in line with some of the other game hardware prices that we're seeing on the market right now. It's obviously not a PlayStation 5, but it is still a weird handheld with a screen built in and a lot of other considerations that a full-blown console does not have to think about. And so $450 for the device itself, again, I think when you look at the current price of the Switch 1, the current price of the Xbox Series X, and the current price of the PlayStation 5, I think that is, from a hierarchy standpoint, like, that price, I think, makes sense. I don't love it. It would be great if everything was, $379 or, whatever. But I think it makes perfect sense with where things are right now. And I think the larger problem is just like, man, no one's getting a fucking break on, with the exception of like, okay, we're going to do a limited time bundle. We're going to cut price for the holidays. Like, if you dig around, you can still kind of find deals on these devices. But even that has gotten confusing in a way, because it's never just like, hey, we're cutting the price. It's more like, oh, they tell me that the PlayStation 5 is $500 if you want one with the drive in it. But then I went and looked at, Best Buy, and it's $30 off that. Like the pricing is just fucking weird based on, oh, this is the one with this bundle and this is that. Like there's just some kind of weird things happening alongside all of that stuff that just makes pricing kind of strange. But where prices are at right now, that is where prices are at right now. And so I think the Switch 2 falls right in line with that. Widen this out a little bit. How much do phones cost? How much do GPUs cost? How much, like look at the costs or lack of price drops on just about everything nowadays. But gaming consoles especially used to operate under this model of just like if you were buying one near the end of the generation, you were getting one for way cheaper than everyone who bought one at launch. And that's just how that stuff always was, going all the way back to the fucking Atari 2600 under $50 commercial that they ran with their absurd jingle that will be with me forever. It's a nightmare, but here we are. Obviously, if you want to have this price conversation and take an even larger, eggs are more expensive than they were, but everything's fucking crazy. Pricing on everything is bonkers. In this country and also abroad in a lot of cases as well. But all of that adds up to say, I don't think that the Switch 2 hardware is inappropriately priced. Now, that said, we're entering some interesting and I will again say unprecedented territory in regards to game pricing. And so Nintendo is going to charge $80 for a copy of Mario Kart World. But that only applies to physical copies of the game, because digital copies of the game will be $70. $70 is a price that I think that as much as I don't think I like it, and I don't know that there's anyone out there that loves games being $70. People in chat are kind of freaking out about that, but I read this last week. I'm going to double check this. Or is it okay? Is that only in Europe? Okay. Sorry, folks. Let me just double check this here, because that was the word last week. Okay, so that's based on EU pricing. Okay. Ugh. What a mess. What a mess. What a mess. Okay, so in the US they're not doing that. Okay. That's even crazier. I was going to say, hey, maybe this is showing a sign that Nintendo is finally willing to throw retailers under the bus a little bit because of cost of goods and some of that other stuff. But no, they don't even have that justification working for them, huh? Okay. So Mario Kart World is $80. Now, I think that when we look at physical pricing, I think that Nintendo is, by going with what we have to assume is faster storage than they did for Switch 1, their cost of goods is going to go up making physical games. If you remember, maybe you don't, but the Switch 2 will only work with micro SD Express cards, which are faster storage, which is more expensive. That's it's more expensive to the tune of like, you can get a 256 gig card on GameStop right now for like $60. That's not going to be your best price for that size, I'm sure, if you look around, because GameStop is, well, I would not go to GameStop for SD cards. Unless you really want one with Mario on it, because they probably have a branded one. But anyway, So again, if they're going to require faster storage for their games, which makes sense because everyone else does, right? The PlayStation 5 will only run games off of its internal storage, and it has very strict requirements for what sort of drives you put in it. If you are adding a drive to it, the Xbox Series consoles are exactly the same way, except they have a proprietary external solution that is like a 1 terabyte little card that you're jacking into the back of that thing, and because that's a proprietary solution, it is overpriced. And if you want to store more of the Xbox Series era games, you need that type of storage. Backwards compatible stuff can be on your busted ass USB drive if you want. They don't care. But current stuff has to be on modern storage. And that's something that, again, the other consoles have been mandating that since the beginning. So it's not shocking that we're seeing a similar move on the Switch 2. But again, that is something that is going to bring up the cost of goods when it comes to manufacturing these things. And I think we've seen an avalanche of effects as a result of that, with some companies opting to just not do it. And they've come up with a interesting solution to that. The other thing, to remember here, I think, with regards to physical games, and just to go over. Okay, so again, apologies. This was stuff that seemed like it was accurate last week when I wrote it down, and I guess as people have picked this information apart, it is just $80 across the board for Mario Kart World. Okay. Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is a Donkey Kong themed 3D platformer where you can pull the world apart and throw it around, and it looks really neat. And it's a great redesign for Donkey Kong, an amazing redesign for the character himself. It looks fucking fantastic. Like, finally, like a Donkey Kong that feels like it should look like this. This is how Donkey Kong should have looked all along. Instead of going down this weird sidetrack where he just looks like an increasingly high-res version of the SGI model they made for Donkey Kong Country. Like, just fucking weird. Just a weird, like, that's history for you. That became Donkey Kong. That was canon Donkey Kong for a long time. Was the SNES model made better and better, but still to look like that. Just weird. Anyway. We finally righted a decades-long wrong with a brand new, great-looking Donkey Kong that I think harkens back like to the original look of Donkey Kong a little bit along the way, and just looks fantastic. Just looks great. Beautiful Donkey Kong, the best-looking Donkey Kong there's maybe ever been. And that game looks extremely entertaining and interesting from a technology perspective, because you're able to just pull holes in the ground, and it feels like a cross between Red Faction, Guerrilla, and the Incredible Hulk games made by the developers of Prototype, the Radical Entertainment. Like, it has that kind of. It is like an Incredible Hulk kind of thing. Looks really neat. That game will be out in July. It is $70. So Mario, $80. Donkey Kong, $70. $70 is still a lot of money. It's still a lot of money. I don't know. I don't have like a but. There's no like, well, but it's gonna, like that game looks like it'll be cool. Mario Kart World looks like it'll be fucking awesome. Like, it's an open world Mario Kart game. They're gonna get into more details on that game in the relatively near future, and they'll probably spend some time talking about why it is an open world game. I feel like they haven't really done that super well at this point. Other than to say, hey, it's a Mario Kart game, but what if you could drive from one event to the next? And that is what that Need for Speed Most Wanted reboot did, and some of those Criterion era Need for Speed games when they were kind of trying to do some cool multiplayer stuff. And that, I don't know. But again, as someone who actually has very little love for the existing Mario Kart franchise, I think if they are creating something that has a lot more going on in it, in an open world that you can explore and do things in, I think that has a ton of interesting potential to me, the person who doesn't like, who doesn't just want to play Mario Kart. So that makes it work for me as a launch game. If they were just like, hey, here's another Mario Kart, I don't think that would be super exciting, but I think it looks really nice. And so, yeah, that's still $70. Dragon Drive is a summer release. They didn't really give too many more details on that because it's not going to be out for a little bit. And there's also the Welcome Tour, which is a kind of collection of mini games designed to help you learn more about the innards of the Switch 2. Sounds like exactly the sort of thing that should be a pack-in tutorial. Here's what your new device, you just spent all this money on this. Isn't this cool? Now here's a thing that'll show you how cool this thing is that you just bought. It's $10. They're going to charge money for it. Now, $10, not a lot of money, but the principle of it in terms of like, okay, why charge anything for it at all? I think that's crazy on their part. I think there's an aspect of this that just goes into like $80 for Mario Kart is already a hell of a lot of money. It's already too much money. And I think that them trying to push game prices on this stuff even further. Again, this is something that made a little bit more sense to me when we thought that the digital version of the game was going to be $70. And by we, I mean me, I guess. Because you could look at it and go like, again, cost of goods are more expensive because the cartridge has to be faster storage and all of this. Like, okay, clearly. And maybe that is still the case. That is still true. But I thought that they were going to finally kind of stick it to retailers and be like, oh, but it'll be $70 if you buy it on the store, if you buy it from us directly digitally, because we don't have to pay that cost of goods at that point. But the thing to remember is that Nintendo, out of all the first parties, actually probably cares about that retailer relationship more than PlayStation or Xbox would. First party sales of Nintendo's games have been doing well, physical, like better than some of their counterparts on other consoles. And so it's a world in which Nintendo still sells a hell of a lot of physical games. And in that environment, they would not, it would behoove them to not fuck the retailers over by saying, if you buy it from us directly, we will knock $10 off the price. And so a lot of this kind of dovetails into the conversation around game key cards, which, okay. So you'll have your video games. You'll buy them. There'll be red versions of the Switch cartridges. You'll plug it into your Switch 2. It will play a video game. It will probably download a patch first because it's 2025. There will also be game key cards, which are physical cartridges that operate in all of the ways that physical cartridges operate, except for one. They do not have the game on them. So you will plug the cartridge in. It will act like a serial number. It will act like a dongle. It will say, oh, there you go. Okay. And then it will download the game from the servers. I don't think that this is a situation. So this is something that has happened for years in a slightly different way. And so this is not a big deal. People have blown this up into being some like massive, like, look at this. I look at this and go like, okay, this is the knock-on effect of like, okay, cost of goods has gone up. Manufacturing these cartridges, especially for some of these larger games, this is going to be more expensive to manufacture. This is going to be more expensive to sell. We're going to have to raise our prices, blah, blah, blah. So instead what they're doing is we're selling something with just a serial number on it or whatever, and then it will download the game. You can give that to someone else and sell it used. You can treat it like a physical game. and it will be passed around, and it can still be used with all of the features of a full-fledged physical game. Now, remember, this is something that, you know, has been happening in a slightly lesser form for at least a generation, if not two. And we have seen multiple cases, particularly with Switch 1 games, but this is something that has happened with, you know, games coming out on PlayStation and Xbox as well, where the full game is not on the disc. You've got a partial game that sort of runs, but maybe it's missing a ton of modes or whatever, or like, hey, like maybe it doesn't even run. I think that, I want to say, was it NBA 2K? There were just where like basically, hey, we wanted to not have the highest capacity Switch 1 cartridge, so we put some baseline data on here, but you're going to have to download all of this patch. Mortal Kombat 1, I believe, is missing its story mode. There are modes missing from Mortal Kombat 1 if you don't download the day one patch. And so people that got access to it early, there was basically nothing. Like it was missing a ton of stuff, and it was ugly as sin. It was a whole thing. And so we've been dealing with this sort of scenario of like, okay, you're not, you know, the full game is not on the cartridge or the disc for a good long time. That ship sailed. So I'm not really, that's not something, I'm not sensitive to that at all. The game key card, I think, is an interesting stopgap on our road to this all digital future that, you know, give it another 10 years if we're all still here, if we're still buying video games, that we will end up in. But, and this is something that I think it's something that impacts Nintendo and Nintendo Switch games more so than other platforms. You still need to be able to buy something for someone else and wrap that present up and hand it to them. Handing them a fucking paper card that has a key on it that they can punch into the store and then buy a game of their choosing, or maybe it's the game itself, sucks. It is a shitty gift. It feels like a shitty gift. It doesn't feel like a real gift. And you'll have, and this is something that I think is partially generational. Like, I wouldn't feel bad about it. But I think if you've got people that are 10, 15 years older than me buying gifts for a child, they're going to want to get something actual, real that they can wrap up. And so Nintendo Switch games need to come in a physical format. Period. There's too many sales, especially around the holiday. There are too many sales wrapped up in that ritual to just completely walk away from it. And so until that ritual has been broken, whether it's an age-based thing and those people are no longer with us, and so it's, you know, younger people who are like me or younger that are just like, fuck it, I wrote down 25, I wrote a 5x5 on this piece of paper and handed it to you, go get an Xbox. And, you know, like, that's something that still matters. And so physical cartridges with the game on them or not continues to matter in this environment. So the game key cards, they allow you to sell them used. They are, you know, it is better and more capable than a straight up digital version of the game, unless you are the sort of person who loses things, in which case it's a fucking disaster, because then you will have downloaded a game to your console that you can no longer play because you lost the piece of plastic that makes it run, which is terrible. It's conceptually insane. But again, until your extended family can, you know, feel comfortable buying you a digital item, and some families have crossed this, you know, Rubicon, some haven't. You're going to continue to have a need for exactly this sort of thing. This solves the problem on the developer end of like, okay, storage is probably more expensive because it needs to be faster and cost of goods goes up. Like this eats into, like, do we need to make our game $70 now just to fucking make this work on a financial level? Because we don't want to do that. We don't think that makes sense. This allows them to have a cartridge that has almost zero storage on it. And so you have a case like Street Fighter 6, which is coming on one of these game key cards. They will pack in the year 1 and year 2 of DLC, so characters and skins and some of that other stuff. And they're going to sell that for $50. But again, it's on a game key card. If they were selling it on if they were putting all of that content, and they said the box looks like it is a 50 gig download. So if they had to sell you a 64 gig cartridge, that might be a $60 package. I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. I can't get too worked up about this specific thing. I think that a lot of the people that are getting worked up about this sort of stuff are the like, what are we going to do when the internet breaks and our video games no longer work? And the answer is we're going to be too busy fighting each other for food and water to fucking care about if I can play Street Fighter without the internet. Like, yes, there's maybe a scenario where, the Switch store, you do have to trust that the Switch store stays up, because if they take it down someday, your game key card will no longer work. And sure, that's a real scenario. But again, there will probably be larger issues. If there's a true outage like that affects more than just Nintendo deciding to shut down a thing. And if you're sitting there going like, what about preservation? Which I'm sensitive to. I am. Download the game from the CDN and wait for people to crack it. Like, I don't know, 15 years down the line, someone will figure this out. Ideally, the situation with that stuff won't be like it was with Switch 1, where it's happening concurrently with sales of the system, because that's a problem. I'm certainly not advocating for actual fucking piracy of the thing while it's happening. But when people go like, oh, what am I going to do when I can't download these day one patches? The answer is someone's been hoarding all that shit on a hard drive, and you'll set up a fake proxy to act like it's the download patch server, and you will put the file on a hard drive and it will download to your console because the console will think it's connected to the real thing. Like, it's not... Like, these are solvable problems on that front. It'd be great if companies actually cared about preservation to the degree that they should. But we got when it comes to that stuff. It's not, there's no money for them on preserving this stuff and selling it to you and ensuring that you're able to download patches for the next 50 years. You cannot trust them on it when it comes to that specific stuff. So like, I don't, it's hard for me to get too worked up about any aspect of this stuff from like that specific like preservation angle, because that's not how games are preserved anyway. Games are preserved on hard drives. Games are preserved all over the internet these days, if you are looking for that sort of thing. Discs deteriorate, the storage mediums deteriorate. It's not, like we're past that. So like, I don't think that's a valid concern in this specific scenario about like, oh, I want all my games to be on the thing. It's like, okay, well, don't play game. Like you're at some point, if your limitations as a consumer are, I'm not going to buy any games unless the game is on the physical thing I'm buying, then you probably should have stopped buying games 10 or 15 years ago. Because between constant patches, games that require a server connection, like games have evolved. Games are bigger than that. Games are bigger than a thing that you can just store on a thing and be like, I'm just playing it offline. Like there are games that require server connections because they're meant to be these big multiplayer experiences, and they go down, and it sucks. It sucks shit. I've liked a lot of games that have gone offline, but I'm not going to sit here and say games should be restricted in what they can be specifically because I need to be able to hoard them on a physical thing. I think that's narrow-minded and just unrealistic at this point. So like the specific complaints around the game key card, I think are weird. Or rather, no, it's not weird. Like, I see why people would go down that road. It's just not based in reality anymore. And I think if you are a person who has that specific type of requirement for your games, you should have been done with games a while ago, because I mean, it's at least been 2 generations now that the discs are just installers. The discs are just fancy downloaders. All you're doing is copying it to a hard drive. Once you think about games as just a thing you copy to a hard drive and run, there's a whole world that opens up. And that's something that, you think about 10 years down the line or whatever. Like, you don't need to think about that with Switch 2 stuff, for the love of God. Brand new. Whatever. There will be no music in the eShop. If you want a position to rage about, this is the one. No music in the eShop. Polygon has that story. The quote they have from Koichi Kawamoto, who's a producer on the Switch 2, says, "Unlike back then, the eShop now has lots of videos that are showcasing the games. We didn't want to intrude on that, so we don't have music there." And that makes sense. I think one of the other stories that kind of came around was the notion that the eShop, they're redesigning the eShop in attempts to make it faster. The eShop always felt like it was hitting a web server and loading a web page, and it was slow and terrible, and it has been for a while. So, yeah, I think in a world where they're trying to make that thing faster and better, I think that's probably, let's say, sensible move. I don't know. I think that there's like a certain joy and joyfulness that Nintendo's platforms have had over the years that they are that they have been slowly getting away from for a good long time now. And this is just this feels like them finally closing the door on that era, which is unfortunate. I think that that's one of the things that they were best at, is having like fun, playful experiences as part of their platform. With the original Switch, I think the coolest sound effect that came out of it was when you scrolled all the way to the end of your game list and hit the button that showed everything you had installed. A little bring, like that's the only good sound on the Switch. So yeah, I don't know. Like the no music in the eShop thing, it hits, but it's understandable. Let's take one last break here, and we'll come back, and we're almost done with Switch 2 talk. Almost. Food delivered to your home. Quality food delivered to your home. You can make this your best season yet with nutritious 2-minute meals from Factor. Eating well has never been this easy. You just heat this stuff up and enjoy it, giving you more time to do what you want. You just stand around and make a bunch of food and you burn it because you're a dummy, and it's just, the whole thing goes south. This is easy. It practically prepares itself. You keep these in your fridge, you take them out, you heat them up, you are done. Plate them if you are a fancy person, if you want to be fancy, or just eat them straight out of the box. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. No one will know. No one will know. Get outside instead of prepping and cooking indoors, These Factor meals arrive fresh and ready to eat. They're perfect for any lifestyle. They have 45 weekly menu options, so you can choose from a wide variety that fit your goals. Also, they have meals that are calorie smart, protein plus, keto, and more. Factor can power your day also with satisfying breakfasts, on-the-go lunches, premium dinners, guilt-free snacks, and desserts. It's easy to savor more this spring. Factor meals pack in the flavor with none of the fuss. They also have the juice. If you're a cold pressed juice kind of person who is not going to press juice. You're not going to buy a juice. You're not going to press juice at home. You're going to go, what, are you going to go to one of the fancy grocery stores and use their press and then pay $1 zillion? No. Factor, you can add on some juice. They will send you some juice. Nice, delicious juice. Get started at factormeals.com/JeffG50off and use the code JeffG50off. That's JeffG50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. That's code JeffG50off at factormeals.com/JeffG50off for 50% off plus free shipping. So yeah, that Switch front end looks pretty similar to the Switch 1's front end. Not entirely unlike the what we experienced on the Xbox side of things, with the interface remaining largely the same, with a few updates here and there. That's kind of the vibe I get from it. I think that's fine. I don't know, man. I still think that there should be a new Xbox interface. I still think that someday they should just remove the entire thing and put in something new and cool. Like they did with the Xbox 360. Remember the new Xbox experience? I mean, everyone misses the blades, but at the time, the NXE was good. People were excited about it. So, I do think that just replacing all of that stuff from time to time to freshen things up, I think is a smooth and smart idea. And I would have liked to have seen Nintendo do a little something else. But I do think the Switch interface is fine. So, it works well enough. But I do think, like no music in the eShop, similar interface, all of that. Like it's just, all of this is just getting a little less interesting. There was a leaked, I guess someone, it's not a pure leak of screenshots, but the next revision to iOS on iPhones, iOS 19, all of the Apple sites are like, someone has recreated, they saw screenshots from someone leak and they redesigned it, and you look at iOS 19 and people are flipping out, and you know what they're doing? The icons are going to be a little more round, and there's going to be some more rounded edges on some of the interface and all that, and you're just like, and I look at it and go like, well, that's something, I guess, but I don't know, man. Sometimes you just need to freshen things up, even if the hardware, that's probably actually a core problem with the iPhone in general, right? Is, I don't know, at some point they got to their existing kind of UI and they just sort of stuck with it. And this is, it's time tested, it's effective, it's efficient, and they've fucking got it down to a science, I'm sure, but it's a lot less fun. It's kind of, I say that's kind of one of the cool things about Android, is that you can just fucking, do whatever, install your own launcher, install your, get all fucking weird with it. But also, I don't think I've ever seen one of those that looked good. So it's just like, if you want like 9 flavors of dog shit, Android is for you. So yeah, I mean, that's the Switch 2. The Switch 1 will continue to get support. This is according to the Washington Post via videogameschronicle.com. The quote here from Bowser is, "What I would say is that we'll continue to observe consumers and how they engage and enter into the platform at various levels to try to really understand what the future may look like. Here's the other point. We have an install base of 150 million plus units. We'll probably announce more on May 8th when we have our next earnings call. We want to keep those players engaged. Not all of them may be ready to jump to Switch 2. So this is them saying that they are looking to continue to support the Switch 1. They said the same thing about the 3DS, and it didn't quite work out the way that that sounded when they said it. So yeah, I don't know. At the end of the day, I think the interesting thing here is that it is not automatic. Getting Switch 1 games running on a Switch 2, it sounds like, is not an automatic process. When you go and look at the compatibility list of Switch 1 games on Switch 2, there's a good chunk of games that still, as of right now, before the system is out, there is a chunk of games that still have some issues that they are working on. And when they tell you it's things we're working on, what that tells you, and they have since, I think, confirmed this, is that they are partially emulating the Switch 1. They don't have the guts of the Switch 1 inside of the Switch 2 in a way that lets them automatically run that. It's not just, here's the faster version of the same processor so we can just clock it down for Switch 1 games. There's more specific work that needs to be done. And so this means that people that are continuing to switch, that are continuing to release Switch 1 games, I assume they will then have to also cert on Switch 2. And I wonder if they will have to be the ones to make sure their games run on Switch 2, or if it's like, hey, if you cert on Switch 1, then it's up to Nintendo to make sure that it runs on Switch 2 via whatever kind of emulation layer they're creating for that. Certainly not the first time that Nintendo has used emulation. This is another thing that has caused like some amount of fervor out there where people have gone like, Nintendo's using emulation, but they sued the guys that made the emulators. Like, well, yeah. Those guys were supposedly trading pirated games around on their Discord. It's not, like, there's still, anyway. Like, yeah, no shit. So, whatever. I don't have another 20 minutes to talk about why that's so dumb that people are acting weird about that. But people are just, I think all of that adds up to, I think a lot of the stuff around the Switch 2 has left a bad taste in people's mouths. And so they are willing to pounce on these like relatively minor things as like, and here's one more thing that they're doing that is bad. And it's not a good scenario for Nintendo to be in. I don't think that they did a very good job of releasing the information about what they were doing and why. I think that they didn't seem prepped in some of these roundtables to answer these questions in a very direct way. Questions that they had to have known would come up around things like the technology inside the controllers, and they came up with these very smooth Nintendo-like non-answers about stuff specifically like the controller that are not that different from like, who developed this game? IGN was trying to ask Bill Trinan about the developers of Donkey Kong Bonanza. Like, who's making it? And he gave the answer that they always give, which is like, well, we'll talk about more about that at a later date, and blah, 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 and not saying who the fuck, which team is making this game. And that's a Nintendo thing. Like, they don't like to put focus on individuals or teams. They like to have their point people, and they put those people out there. But even in those cases, they don't want those point people to become bigger than the game. And so it just makes sense. Like, I think when you think about Nintendo from that front, like, Nintendo wants to be the monolith. Who's making this game? Nintendo. That's who. Stop asking. Does it have the Nintendo logo on it? Nintendo made it. It's a Nintendo game. You should buy it. Why? Because Nintendo makes good games. Leave us alone. That has been their attitude for a very long time. So yeah, but they had to have known that all of these sorts of questions would come up, and and I think that the way that they handled it was very, and this is stuff that is actually even weirder now because the price is likely to change, at least here in the States, is this whole notion of the way they handled it, where they put out this hour-long video, and at no point did they address the cost of the system. It was like, oh, well, here's like after the fact. And, they do that for localization reasons. They don't want it to leak, whatever else. Like, it was more like after the fact, they didn't point people to like, now go here for the rest of the information. It was just like, hope you dug the info, peace. And then it became like this mad dash to figure out like, okay, what the fuck is going on? How much is this stuff? Wait a minute. And having like, it was basically like, here's a presentation that people are coming away from it going like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like, I don't know, the game chat stuff, whatever, but like Mario Kart looks good and this looks good. And then like 10 minutes after it's over, people are going, wait a minute, this game's $80 fucking. Wait, what? They want how much for this? And frantically trying to figure out like, what is this information? Because they didn't have just like, here's a page you go to that has the rest of the stuff. A lot of the people who would report that information were at a hands-on event checking it out. So they weren't writing up those stories at that point. So it was left to people who were like back at home base, like scrambling around, looking at like, wait a minute, okay, there's a press release here, but that press release doesn't really have, like, it's missing this piece and this piece. And so like people were having to pull from all over the place to put it together. And there was chaos in the middle of all that. Ultimately, maybe this doesn't matter, right? The system goes on sale and whatever. And the American situation with the tariffs and what the final price is, leaves another situation where this could get even crazier. You know, but there's a sloppiness to it that Nintendo is usually a little bit better at. It's just a communications failure. It's just like a failure to anticipate what that information was, or like a feeling of like, hey, people are going to not be okay with these prices. And then like kind of not telling them in a direct way of just like, okay, I need to scroll on this side. If I go to the site and find the Mario Kart page, I'm scrolling down. Oh wait, $79.99. What the fuck? You know, there's just, because pre-orders didn't start, you couldn't find all that information at every single retailer out there. It just, none of it just, it just felt very all over the place. It felt like a scramble in a way that Nintendo should have done better at. But again, you know, then they went and delayed all of that stuff the very next day. All that is to say, like, who knows? Maybe Mario Kart will be more than $80 by the time we're done. You know, because those, you know, a lot of disc and cartridge manufacturing operations are set up outside the U.S. as well. So it's likely that tariffs will impact software as well as hardware. Yeah, that's the Switch 2, I guess. That's where we're at with it now, I guess. You know, who knows what'll happen tomorrow, the next day. I don't even know anymore. I guess the last little bit we didn't really cover is that, you know, there will be paid upgrades for some existing Switch 1 games. And the Zelda games will be getting like what looked like turn-by-turn GPS in a separate phone app. Hobbit Rocks My World asks, would tariffs impact digital as well? So I don't believe so, but it gets back to some of the conversation we were having earlier about like a pricing disparity between physical and digital. Is how willing are you to throw retailers to the wolves? How willing are you to just put that on the physical version and make that less attractive than the digital version? That's something that eventually, you know, as more and more sales shift digitally, is not as big of a deal, but right now does still matter, probably more for Nintendo than just about anyone else. In the past, when this subject has been broached about like, oh, well, if you're doing digital sales and whatever else, and you're doing them cheaper than the physical version, the retailers would try to band together and basically say, well, if you do that, we're not going to carry your products. If you fuck us over on this stuff, we're not going to sell your games, and we're not going to sell your hardware either. And that's kind of their nuclear option when it comes to that stuff, is like, well, we just won't stock it. Fuck you guys. And so up until this point, like that conversation has, you know, or that friction, potential friction, has prevented anyone from saying, hey, all our digital games are $10 cheaper because we don't have to make discs. Instead, they're charging, you know, the same price, and they make a lot more money on their digital games, I'm sure. There's the server costs and things they have to do with bandwidth and whatever else that, you know, that they do have to pay some money to distribute digital games, but it's a different type of cost in a lot of ways. So no one has really broached that. I thought until about 45 minutes ago that Nintendo was going to finally be the ones to throw the trash can through the pizza shop window, but not this time. And we'll see. The other downside of all this, you know, pricing stuff is that none of it will ever go down. You know, Nintendo's games in particular, they don't really go on sale very often. They'll do like a holiday sale. They'll do this or that, but like they especially don't really drop the price. And so when we have these situations of just like, even, you know, when we see tariffs impacting prices or what have you, or inflation really is the big mover on this, more so than tariffs, because tariffs are a lot more rare. But when we see prices like this go up due to inflation, it's not like when the, you know, economy changes and the inflation situation changes that like the price just gradually creeps down with all that other stuff. Everyone just goes like, oh, cool, we got them used to paying $80 for this stuff. This is great. Let's keep charging $80 for this stuff. This is awesome. I love this. So I charge $80 for a game all day long. This is great. I'm sure Sony and Microsoft are eyeballing this and going like, huh, all right. Let's take a look. Let's take a look. And seeing if it's something that they can try to, you know, get away with as well. Or if it's something that they want to pivot off of and be like, our games aren't $80, you know, like whatever. You know, Microsoft can talk about Game Pass some more, right? So, I don't know. It's always a lot of different ways that stuff can go. But yeah, price drops are a lot more rare because they're more closely associated with just like, oh, the strength of the US dollar versus like, oh, this thing went down $10 or whatever. The ESA has given a few quotes about some of the tariffs in general. This is not necessarily directly related to Nintendo, but more the video game industry in general. Aubrey Quinn, who's the senior VP of the ESA, spoke with Stephen Totillo of GameFile.news a little bit about the tariffs and said, any one product that a consumer would buy is likely to be subject to many of the tariffs announced, all compounded on top of one another. Meaning that, you know, if some parts are coming from one country and some are coming from another, then different parts of a device might have different levels of tariffs levied on them, which is, I'm sure, a very easy calculation to fucking figure out. And so with a 46% tariff on Vietnam, and at the time that this was written, we were talking about 34 or 54% on China, though it sounds like that's now more like 104. Yeah, this is stuff that, again, this is all still annoyingly up in the air. Even if the news was bad, it would be nice to just fucking know, instead of like this forever axe over everyone's head on all of this stuff. You know, like, hey, let's create some panic buying by threatening to raise the price on everything. Cars across the way, like dude. Yeah. It's really profoundly dumb. There was an interesting leak of some unannounced / abandoned Nintendo Switch games yesterday, or at least news broke of it yesterday. It sounds like someone bought a dev kit. That's what this, and the games that are part of this are from a variety of publishers. So you would have to assume then that the dev kit leaked out of either some part of Nintendo itself or an external QA firm that has contracts with a lot of different devs, or something of that nature. It's hard to really know. But the presence of, I guess, debug builds of Splatoon 2 says to me that this is something that came out of Nintendo's hands, or at least a firm contracting directly with Nintendo. The couple of weird things here, well, whatever. The one thing that I actually want to talk about is that there was a fucking Ridge Racer game in development for the Switch. The builds seem to be from around 2017. And the Ridge Racer game in particular seems to have been developed by a Bandai Namco Studios in Singapore. It's built on Unreal Engine 4, and there's footage of it out there because I guess these builds leaked and people have figured out a way to get them to run. I don't know about that end of it. I have not dug into it like that. There was a canceled game from Retro Studios known as Project Harmony on there. There's been some developers that have talked a little bit about that game in the years since, as basically saying it's something that just didn't come together. Lego Civilization also as part of this, a Lego Civ, which is both a really cool idea and demographically bonkers. Like, why? Okay. Like, when I hear a Lego Civ, I'm like, that's fuck yes. They should absolutely do that. And I think about it a little bit more and I'm like, okay, does Gandhi nuke everyone in Lego Civ? Are we allowing that? Or do we have to rein it in? Lego doesn't work with M-rated properties, which is why you never got a Lego Mortal Kombat. Not that Civ is an M-rated property, but it does have things like that in it that might be a little outside of the Lego brand book. So would they make changes to kind of soften aspects of it? Maybe, I don't know. But that's an interesting concept. The Ridge Racer game, looking at there's a video on YouTube of it running, and I'm really melancholy about it for a couple of reasons. I'm really up and down on it because you look at it and go like, man, a new Ridge Racer. Someone was actually making one, and then it, for whatever reason didn't happen. What a fucking bummer. And then you look at the footage, and it just looks like yet another game in the same mold as like modern Ridge Racer, of like the games that came out, whether it's the thing that came out on the Vita or it's the PSP games, which are great games. Ridge Racer 6 and 7 are cool, but like they settled into a real specific feature set with Ridge Racer in terms of like, oh, you're going to have a 3-level nitrous boost and you can do level 1, level 2, or level 3, and then you can go from there. And there's aspects of Ridge Racer that I think are more, that should be more than that and should be more than that. And I think it's part of the reason why we don't get Ridge Racer games anymore is because they became the exact same thing over and over again. There's like 4 games I could point to, like the last 4 Ridge Racer games that are not Unbound. That's a whole separate thing. That are basically the same game with a lot of the same tracks and just released on different platforms in some cases. But, they did both those PSP games. I think if you're looking to go back and play Ridge Racer games, those PSP games are great. And they up-res really well. They're nice. But I think if they were to do a Ridge Racer game, they need to do more than just port those same mechanics over to yet another platform and put it back out. Maybe it's been long enough that they could get away with it, but also at the same time, like, man, I just don't think you could do it. They did announce that Ridge Racer would be coming, like the Arcade Archives Ridge Racer will be released on I guess Switch 2, along with, presumably some other platforms, but that's cool. Yeah, it's interesting. It's not every day that you hear about unannounced games leaking into the wild, and long canceled games, especially. Like, it just doesn't happen nearly as often as maybe it did 20 years ago or something. But fascinating to think about what those games might have done had they come out. BAFTA, the British Arts Film Television Academy? Is that what the fuck does BAFTA stand for? They released the results of a poll, and it's the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. Yes, okay. They do some stuff with games. They do awards for games. I think are they happening? I saw pictures of Andy Robinson in a tux. I assume that means that the awards are happening. But ahead of that, they did a poll to try to determine the most influential video game of all time. And I spent way too long running this down and trying to figure out like what the hell this was, because I just kept seeing people writing stories about like, here are the most influential games of all time according to BAFTA. But it was actually just a poll that they let anybody vote in. And so the results are like the results you would get when you just open up a thing and let anybody vote. And it's kind of embarrassing. They put out the top 21 respondents here. At 21 is Grand Theft Auto, meaning GTA 1. They are breaking out individual games here. At number 20 is Skyrim. At number 19 is GTA 3. At number 18 is Dark Souls. And they've got a little paragraphs that they've written here, like Miyazaki's seminal dark fantasy saga has become so influential that, quote, the Dark Souls of ... is a common indicator that a stern challenge awaits. I'll give him that. Final Fantasy VII at 17. Baldur's Gate 3 at 16? What? World of Warcraft at 15. Metal Gear Solid at 14. Pong at 13. Tomb Raider at 12, because it's a British poll. Tetris at 11. The Sims at 10, which would you call The Sims influential, or would you call The Sims popular? I don't know. I mean, some people made some bad ripoffs of The Sims over the years, but in terms of actual genuine market influence, like, there's certainly some. At number 9 is Half-Life 2. At number 8 is Super Mario 64. At number 7, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. A game that is about 3 months old, 2 months old. So if you needed any indication that they just let people vote and just write in whatever, and that this whole list is embarrassing, there you go. It's nothing about the quality of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. People seem to like it just fine. I think calling it the 7th most influential game of all time 2 months after it's out, when not a single game that was influenced by it could have possibly shipped, is a farce. At number 6 is Minecraft. At number 5 is Ocarina of Time. At number 4 is Half-Life 1. So Half-Life 2 at number 9. Half-Life 1 at number 4. At number 3, Super Mario Brothers. At number 2 is Doom. And number 1, the most influential game of all time, according to the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, Shenmue. Like, again, I don't want to have a conversation about the quality of Shenmue because that's a separate conversation. And they and someone had to try to write this up in a way that tried to make it make sense. Chris Schilling, according to this, had to write something up. The quieter moments in otherwise noisy blockbusters such as Uncharted 4, The Last of Us Part 2, and God of War surely took their cues from Suzuki's game. No? What? No! And its spirit lives on through the increasingly popular Yakuza / Like a Dragon series, which similarly encourage you to slow down every now and again. This just reads like they ran a poll and then and then poor Chris Schilling, whoever Chris Schilling is, had to then make it make sense. And they pulled quotes. They went and got some quotes from other people that I think are like BAFTA voters or for Half-Life, it says, for example, presenter, writer, and podcaster Jane Douglas chose Valve's 1998 first-person shooter, quote, for its wide-ranging achievements in visuals and in physics, but also in storytelling and world building. As for Half-Life 1, I would say that Half-Life 2 is probably the one that is more known for its physics than Half-Life 2, or Half-Life 2 is more known for its physics than Half-Life 1, but okay. So yeah, just a weird thing overall. I mostly wanted to just kind of call attention to this because it made the rounds without any of the qualifications as like, hey, clearly this thing was just a popularity contest. Like people just wrote in whatever. So in the intro it says here, to reflect the medium's universal impact ahead of the 21st BAFTA Games Awards, we asked the public a provocative question: what is the most influential video game of all time? So there you have it. But that wasn't the thing that made the rounds. Instead, it was just the Eurogamer headline: Shenmue voted most influential game of all time in BAFTA poll, beating Doom and Mario. And then in the third graph, they mention it's a public voted poll. But there were a lot of other stories that didn't mention, hey, this was just a public voted poll. They did not get scholars of video games together and try to figure this out. They didn't poll people in the video game industry. They let you go to a website, presumably, and write in whatever the hell you wanted to, and then just ran with that. And that's how you end up with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 on a list of the most influential games of all time, which is bananas. So I mostly just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that, because again, I think a lot of that got lost in the, as stories like this hit social media and they get thrown around all over the place, like all of that context gets lost. And then you're like, wait, they said fucking what? It's a terrible list, but it's public voted. So like, what are you going to do? Like, at some point you could probably find some Steam message board thread or something on the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 boards of people going like, go vote, and trying to convince people to go write it in or something, right? I mean, there almost has to be. GTA 1 and GTA 3 both near the bottom of the list. I think you could say that GTA 3's influence is maybe waning a little bit after years of it being probably the most influential thing around, to the detriment of a lot of other games. I think that its influence is maybe not as strongly felt as it was in the 10 to 15 years after its release. I think you could probably, if you went and asked a lot of like creative directors or a lot of like high level developers like about Shenmue specifically, I think that they would have things to say about it that are positive. And so I don't think that Shenmue is a game that has zero influence or whatever, but I do think if we're thinking about direct influence game to game, Shenmue's a rough one, and then the text justifying it, mentioning like all Sony first party games as like, here's great examples of Shenmue's influence. God of War. Like, no, like I don't. No. Uncharted 4. Like, no, just. I mean, those games, like Last of Us, like is also like those games are influenced by modern cinema, modern film. Like they're very, especially the Naughty Dog stuff. Uncharted and Last of Us are very, deliberately cinematic in their storytelling and their nature. It's not necessary. Those are not necessarily games where you just have a lot of time to stand around and kind of do whatevs. It isn't. None of those games are full reactive eyes entertainment. Is my point. So yeah, I think that's kind of wild. And it's a bummer. Like I just look at it and go like, and the BAFTAs, they cover a lot more than just games. They're not like a games focused award outfit. They're like doing television and all this other stuff all the time. So games are not their main thing anyway. So it shouldn't be too surprising that they're like, that they just did this public voted thing that just seems way off base, and it got people talking ahead of their awards show. So I guess congratulations to them. But it's for the wrong reasons. I think that, especially when the context collapses out of this and you lose the part where it was user voted and where it was, just kind of another popularity contest on the internet, it makes the BAFTA organization look like a joke. That's probably not good for them. It's probably not good for them overall. But that doesn't mean that all of their picks are wrong either. Like I do think that, I think we think about games like Doom is on this list, and I think Doom makes a ton of sense. I think anytime you can look at a game and say, this is we used to call this genre by this game name and the word clone after it, that's usually a good early indicator of a very influential game. Doom clones. Pac-Man clones. Like that probably makes a ton of sense. Pong is on the list, and I guess yes, of course, there are things that never would have happened without the release of Pong in terms of it being an arcade game. But I think mechanically you look at Pong and you go like, okay, well, Pong led to Breakout, and Breakout led to Super Breakout, and Pong led to a zillion home machines with a bootleg Pong on it. And that, that's certainly a massive thing that happened in this business and what have you. I don't know, this list has Ocarina of Time and Super Mario 64 on it, and I don't know. Ultimately, I as a person who loved Ocarina of Time, I think if we're thinking about it as an influential thing, it's hard to. It's hard to keep that here because I think that when we look at Ocarina's influence, I think it is Z targeting. I think it's lock-on targeting in a 3D game. I think that is the main thing you could take away from Ocarina of Time as this is a thing that went on to appear in zillions of games afterwards. It is the Z targeting. It is that aspect of the game specifically. They had a unique solution for jumping in that game where you just kind of didn't, and he would automatically hop over gaps unless you were doing side jumps in combat. And that was an interesting idea to solve that problem, but it didn't lead to a bunch of developers going on and stealing that mechanic either. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think that if we're thinking about pure influence, I think Super Mario 64 is a better choice than Ocarina because of, just what it did for realizing some of these concepts in a 3D space to begin with. If anything, Mario is the game that then influenced, that made Zelda possible, that made Ocarina possible anyway. So it's kind of a weird thing. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's it's an interesting debate, I guess, nonetheless. But like, I think that the way that they determined this, the way that they did not filter this, the way they didn't say, oh, you can only vote for games that are X amount of years old, or, you know, something to like have some kind of hand on the rudder of this to say, no, you can't put Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 on this list, you dopes. Like, that's not that's not possible. That's not the point of this list, is completely like based on whatever. But influence is a weird thing, right? It's not just this raw mechanic got stolen and used a zillion times. Like, that's certainly part of it. But like, it's modes of being. It's how does this game exist? How does this game convey information to the player? It's what's the movement feel like? How does this, you know, but it's also super individualized things about like, this was a control scheme that simply didn't exist before. And that can matter, you know. I think, yeah, Super Mario Brothers, the original, belongs on this list. Sure. Was it the very first platformer? Like, no, but you know, most games prior to that were, especially in arcades, were traditionally done on single screens, and you know, it was sort of a different thing. Rogue should be on this list. Especially these days. Rogue is a game and a genre whose influence is being felt more by the fucking day. So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird. It's weird. Like GTA 1, the primary thing that GTA 1 influenced was GTA 2. Right? I mean, no one looked at GTA 1 and said, we've got to make one of those. No one looked at GTA 2 and said, we've got to make one of those. If you haven't played GTA 1 and 2, they're really interesting to look at now. I loved those games when they came out. Absolutely loved those games. But they were fucked because they were kind of rooted in this like they were almost like trying to be arcade games in a weird way. Like, they weren't like save your progress and then go forward and then do this type of things the way GTA 3 would become. It was like, okay, do these missions and yeah, like there's a progression and you get to the next area and you do this and that, but ultimately, like, how high is your score? Like, a lot of it was like, you know, did you get the high score or not? And like all of that, which is like a weird, it's just a weird concept to think about when we think about Grand Theft Auto, because obviously that stuff would be completely thrown away. It was a game where I stayed in the first area most of the time because I was bad at most of the missions that they gave you to do, but it sure was fun to steal a car and drive it around and run stuff over. And then when you ran over all the guys and it said Goranga, you were like, fucking yeah, right on. Like they're awesome games for when they were released. And that's, you know, that's kind of about it. But you know, GTA 3 obviously is a game that changed gaming in a variety of ways. Like that's probably got to be a top 5 kind of game at this point. But you know, Half-Life and Half-Life 2 probably belong on a list. I think, you know, the influence felt by stuff like Half-Life is probably storytelling in action games. The way that they conveyed information to the player in Half-Life, that is probably the actual thing that makes Half-Life more than kind of just another Doom clone or just another Quake or whatever, you know, wherever we were at that point. Like, you know, like having and the way that those games opened with scripted storytelling sequences and all of that, I think was really novel, if nothing else at the time. It didn't make the shooting any better, but you would have to call that out as something that that game did that other shooters of the era weren't doing. You could maybe even say that like Max Payne 1 or 2, really, I guess, contributed to that in a similar way, though less so in mission, more so with cutscenes. You could absolutely make a case for Resident Evil 4. Fred Chuck Davis saying RE4 pretty influential. Like, yeah, you could absolutely say that a Resident Evil 4 belongs in this conversation. I never saw that is and maybe it's because I never really connected with RE4 in any way. I found the shooting to be impenetrable and found it I could not stand the actual action in RE4. And so it was always very interesting to me when you would see like a Cliff Bleszinski talk about RE4 as being a direct influence on Gears of War, because I never really saw it. But it's in a lot of ways it's because, and Kill Switch obviously, came before Gears and did the cover shooter kind of thing that Gears went on to hone. But in terms of just like shooting and mechanics and stuff like that, or whether it's camera and some of that other stuff that RE4 does, that Gears tried to, that they saw that as an influence on Gears of War, was always very interesting to me. As someone who just never, I could never play it. Part of it was that the laser sight was red and I couldn't see it, so I couldn't aim for shit in that game. So it was just like a color blindness, like accessibility thing. Like I just couldn't fucking see it to shoot. But yeah, I never really had much fondness for RE4. Tetris, I think you got to figure out what does influence mean in this specific case, because like Tetris is certainly influential. It created a cottage industry of ripoffs, and like the same way Pac-Man did. And so I think that's something that you probably include on this list. Yeah, does Z-Wolf says, does PUBG count? Sure. But do you say it's PUBG, or do you say it's like Arma, or whatever game was modded to make all that stuff happen to begin with, or I don't know. But it's probably PUBG. You probably are calling out PUBG specifically there, because it did it as a separate game. It did it in very deliberate ways, whereas like DayZ and some of the H1Z1 or whatever else, like, I don't know. You can maybe give it to the mod. I mean, if we're giving it to mods, then you're at some point you're putting Dota on this list, right? I mean, either way, at some point you're putting Dota on this list, or you're putting Warcraft 3 on here. I don't know. Yeah. You're putting Warcraft 3 on specifically because of Dota, though. You'd probably put Counter-Strike. Yeah, Counter-Strike would probably make sense for something like this too. Dune, yeah, Dune. Maybe like even Herzog's Vi or something. You could try to make a case for that. Do you cite World of Warcraft for bringing MMOs to the masses, or do you talk about EverQuest, or do you talk about UO? You probably don't talk about UO. You probably are either picking EverQuest or WoW. EverQuest for kind of specifically codifying a lot of the perspective and some of that stuff that Unreal Online, Ultima Online didn't necessarily do. Think of all the games that came and went in the wake of World of Warcraft for like a decade plus of, and it, it's the same thing we saw in, battle royale games, like everyone thought like, oh, we're going to make the WoW killer. We're going to make the game. We're going to make the next big MMO. Ours has furries in it. What was that game? WildStar? Firestar? What was the was it WildStar? Where the characters kind of look like furries? Yeah. Yes, a wide variety of games that said we're going to do World of Warcraft but this, and it's going to be the biggest thing ever. And then, maybe they had 18 months in them or something. Games failed, took a little bit longer to fail back then. But yes, the close of this is that, yes, the BAFTAs are happening right now, so they'll be giving some awards to some games. Hopefully that stuff is more well considered than this list of influential video games. That's all I know. And that's going to do it for the news. Podcast@guard.bike is your email address to send in emails to me. And ask me questions about, I guess, the world of video games. I don't know. Clement writes in from Illinois and says, is it just me or does another Sony handheld seem unlikely to succeed? Microsoft has a ready blueprint from Valve, so I'm sure an Xbox handheld would do fine. But Sony doesn't have Windows and doesn't make their prestige single-player strategy work on a proprietary, and hasn't made their single-player prestige strategy work on a proprietary handheld before. Will a Sony handheld attract enough third-party support, and has Sony learned what not to do as a first-party handheld publisher since the Vita? So, there has been talk about Sony, working on a handheld and all of that. So that's kind of the context here. Obviously, Microsoft has said the same thing. And the approaches are probably different. We don't know that much about what a PlayStation handheld would be at this point in time. But if we want to speculate a little bit, I think it's easy to say that any kind of Xbox handheld is probably a Windows device and probably informs whatever their future device strategy is going forward across all form factors. And we've seen some, kind of reporting around the idea that, like, yeah, they're looking at maybe opening things up and doing something differently. Sony is unlikely to ship a Windows device, right? It's possible that they could put the Vio logo on it. I don't know. Sony has made laptops and all this other stuff over the years. Like, they're not complete strangers to that architecture and to those types of devices, right? They could do something like that, but it seems unlikely that that's the approach that they would take with another handheld PlayStation. So I think instead what we're going to see out of them is, and the thing that will make this different than the Vita or even the PSP, is I think what they will probably do is that this will be a device that runs existing games. Not to the degree that they run on a PlayStation 5 or what have you, but this will be a device that will run games that were originally intended to be run on a console. Whether they're making something that is directly a handheld PlayStation 4 or some kind of portable low-end PS5. I think the only strategy that makes sense for them is to do something like that. And now look at what the obviously Nintendo is not going to go all out on specs and everything. That's never been their particular verve. But look at the device they were able to make and sell for $450. Look at the, obviously the Steam Deck has been iterated on, and so the cheapest Steam Deck I think right now is $350. And it's still, probably technically a little more powerful than a Switch 2, but it's in the wheelhouse, right? So if they were to make a device right now, if Sony were to issue a device right now, it would probably be somewhere in that same range, which then poses the question, how hard would it be to get their existing console library up and running on such a device? Probably not super easy. If they were to make a portable PS4, probably easier than to say, oh, now all these PS5 games need to run on a way less powerful device. Like, that seems like something that would take a lot of work from developers and everything else, right? Like, they don't get that for free. But I do think that they can't just launch a device with its own proprietary library like they did with the Vita and like they did with the PSP and say, hey, now, now go buy games for this. We had some other weird external studio make yet another Uncharted game that you're not going to play. Like, it's just not, it didn't work with the Vita. It would work even worse this time out unless they were to devote such massive resources to software development in a way that would not make sense, as they need to continue to fuel their existing console business and wouldn't really be able to do that. So I think whatever they do ends up being something that runs existing games. It's something that probably doubles as a portal if you want to run games off. Obviously whatever they would make would probably be remote play capable, but also be able to run games natively. I think that's the only way for this to work, right? It wouldn't make any sense for them to just put out their own stuff, their own brand new platform, and go through that motion. Because I don't think third parties would want to support it. Interestingly, we still see some games that are just coming out on PS4 that don't need the power of the PlayStation 5, and so rather than even creating a PS5 version of the game, they just ship it on PS4 because they know it'll run on a PS5 and you can still buy it just the same. We still see a small handful of games that fall into that specific weird bucket. That's what makes me think maybe there is an opportunity for hey, if you can make something that runs PS4 games, because there is still some PS4 development happening, then maybe that's an opportunity, or maybe that is the opportunity that doesn't cost them a zillion extra dollars in R&D and having to custom make new games for a new platform. I don't know. But when I walk through it like that, it's impossible for me to see a scenario where they are launching just another pure play handheld device and they say get things for the Vita 2 or the PSP 3 or whatever they call it. That just doesn't seem like it makes sense. So yeah, I that's I think what would separate whatever they would be doing from what happened with the Vita. And why it could potentially, work. Kyle writes in and asks a question about Game Pass developer compensation. Just wants to know if I know how it works. Specifically because he wants to play Borderlands 3 now that it's on Game Pass, but he does not want to put any money in Randy Pitchford's pocket. Says here, ever since I purchased and the subsequent truth came out about Gearbox and Aliens Colonial Marines, I made it a prime directive to never allow any action I take to benefit Randy Pitchfuck, is what he has written here. Okay. Are they paid? Basically, he wants to know if they're paid a flat rate for access to the game or if they're paid based on engagement. I do think that if you play Borderlands on Game Pass, that they are getting money for that. My understanding of the payouts is that it is typically a factor of engagement, of how many hours or how many people or what have you. There's whatever metric they use. My understanding is that there is typically usage-based payouts on Game Pass. So if you are highly motivated to not send any money Gearbox's way, which, by the way, you know, that a lot of that money just goes to 2K. At this point, because now they're owned by 2K, they're not an independent company. So, you know, like, I'm sure that he is on some kind of bonus structure or whatever involved, you know, around performance of the games. But, you know, he works for 2K now, technically. If that changes anything for you one way or the other. I might also say, you could just not play Borderlands 3. It's okay. You could probably miss that one. If you liked it, he says, I enjoyed Borderlands 1 and 2 for what they were. Yeah, I think Borderlands 3 kind of crosses a line on the enjoy them for what they were scale, and the writing just gets into a place that's just, it's that stuff's bad. The writing is real bad in that game. It's rough. So I might just say you're okay on that one. But if you felt that Borderlands 2 was, yeah, maybe I don't know. Maybe you actually like that writing, in which case you should reevaluate everything about all of this situation. Let's see here. Charlie from England says, did Nintendo just bring back Kinect? Is the Switch 2 just a handheld Xbox One? It's got a weird camera. It's covered in microphones. It's championing second screen experiences and is arguably going to be underpowered from day one. I'm sure it'll be fine. It'll sell millions of units, but I can't help but feel they repackaged a 12-year-old idea that doesn't resonate with consumers into a handheld console. Charlie, I'm going to say yes, but also they will have better first-party support than Microsoft gave to the Xbox One out of the gate. Well, maybe not out of the gate, but over time. I might also say that, you know, hey, the camera is sold separately, so you don't have to go and do that. But yeah, so like, you know, as we discussed, like a big part of their pitch was around this like camera and voice chat experience that feels like a ship that has sailed a long time ago. But perhaps generationally, we've kind of gone back around the wheel far enough to where now there's a new generation of kids that would be down to voice chat with their friends. You know, the Switch demographics probably skewing significantly younger than PS5 or Xbox One at this point. Though we'll see, you know, Switch 2 pricing may price a lot of kids out of the market, or might be too expensive for that type of gift for some kids, you know. We'll see how all that shakes out. But yeah, I do think that there are a lot of old ideas in that Switch 2 stuff, and you know, you eventually, and this is something I've kind of been through a time or two with a few in a few different ways, particularly working on the internet for as long as I have. You eventually live long enough that you see it all come back again. And this is always really weird in a business setting, in a work environment, because you're the person who knows why none of these ideas worked. And this is not specifically about the camera or whatever else. Like, it is, you know why these ideas didn't work last time. You were there when those questions were asked last time, and you're like, huh, fuck, man. I don't know if I want to sit here for another round of this shit again. If you're just going to bring in a fresh batch of dudes in fucking middle management positions who are going to ask the same stupid questions all over again, maybe this is where I get off. Because fuck, dude, I cannot. And that's, if you work on the internet long enough, I've been through a couple cycles of that over the years of just like, dude, This feels like baseline information that everyone here should already know, and we're wasting time by explaining it all over again instead of actually getting things done. What a fucking dumb fucking idea. So yeah, you know, I that happens with everything, right? I don't necessarily think that the Switch voice chat stuff is compelling. I think that some people will use it. I think in a world where social media is, you know, significantly shittier now than it maybe was 4 or 5 years ago, Nintendo going and building more of its own feature set directly is probably not the worst idea in the world. But at the same time, yeah, it's hard to envision a scenario where like this stuff catches on like it's the freshest brand new stuff. You know, like unless they're going to come out and say, hey, by the way, you can also use all of this gear to just stream directly to Twitch, which I don't think they did not say that, and I don't think that they will. For performance reasons, it just seems like they won't be able to do that. You know, that was something that when the consoles did that, it was like interesting conceptually, but I don't know how many people actually did it or did it like for a long time. You had like that dude playing guitar on PS4 for a good long time, and it was sick, but also it was just like, what is happening here? It's so weird. And like, I don't know, that stuff was like fun, but not in a real way. And I don't think Nintendo will do anything like that. But, you know, sometimes you just want to watch weird people do drugs on their voice chat cameras. And the Xbox Live Vision camera was great for that. I don't think Nintendo's going to build a service that is conducive to that sort of thing, because I think they're going to build it more around friends than strangers. And yeah. Daddy Warbucks writes in and says, I love Splatoon. Trying to use a joystick to aim is a skill I lost a decade ago. I have a shit-ass piece of hardware that lets me use a mouse on the Switch, but it would be nice if I could actually use a normal mouse aiming. Do you think that I can plug a real mouse into the Switch too? No, I don't. I think that unlike the camera, which they are going to support some third-party cameras, they are going to build a lot of their kind of mouse concepts around the specifics of the Joy-Con and how it moves. And they will probably also build games where you pick up the Joy-Con and do stuff with it that you will not be able to do with a regular mouse. And so I just think you're going to have too many situations where like they come up with playful scenarios that you know are lifting that thing off of your Surface and doing things with it in all of these games, to where you would even if a real mouse could work, it would probably just from a functionality standpoint be missing too much to be viable. So yeah, you know, maybe you will still have your nightmare fucking weird third-party fucking Cronus disaster thing that will, you know, let you hook a mouse up to it and fake it. But I'm guessing that just from a, you know, like basically as soon as I saw them twist a Joy-Con on the Surface and say, look at this and you can do this, I was like, oh yeah, huh, shit. Yeah, they're gonna have a feature set for this mouse thing that is going to not be compatible with an actual old mouse. Maybe they would be open to developers doing it, like you know, if yeah, something like Civ that, you know, just obviously is just a mouse and keyboard kind of game originally. Like maybe they could say, oh, we're gonna do just a mouse mode for it, and you can just plug in a mouse. But I don't think that's something that we would see supported widely. That would almost be something that, like, if they let a third party just get away with it. Like if the Civ devs came to them and said, we'd love to actually just have, you know, support for a USB mouse. I don't know if anyone did that. I don't know if any Switch games allowed mouse and keyboard stuff on it the way that some Xbox and PlayStation games did. It probably didn't. I don't know of any, but I don't know if that's something that Nintendo straight up shoots down, or if just no developers ever wanted to do it or ever thought to do it or pitched it to them as like, hey, can we have our game support mouse and keyboard. But yeah, maybe there were some. But I would guess that there would be situations that if a developer really wanted to make a game with proper mouse and keyboard support on Switch, Nintendo would probably allow it, but they probably would not have a bunch of support at the system level. Okay, so Balatro, you can use a mouse, okay, on Switch. So there you go. There's a couple games that actually do have regular mouse support. I would bet it would be a scenario like that, where if you have developers that said, fuck it, let's do this, or that they would allow it. But again, they're not gonna just generically support a mouse in place of the Joy-Cons. Andrew writes in and says, why is it that I can rattle off all these annoying, shitty things Nintendo does, and yet in the back of my mind think maybe I should pre-order one of those? It has me wondering how that works. Maybe it's just because my first video game console was the SNES with Mario Kart and Mario World, and so that nostalgia is just baked in too deep across a lifetime. How do they get away with being a deeply frustrating company that people still happily give so much money to? So sure, yeah, I mean, there are a few different reasons, right? For some people, yes, that will be the nostalgia part of it, where you're like, of course I want to play this. But I think, generically, I think if you extract it from that, the things that people are frustrated about when it comes to Nintendo and the way that they make games are rarely things that are contained in the games themselves. Like, look at the things that, people are saying about the Switch 2. It's, this game is way too expensive. It's, the power on this, maybe not, maybe it'll be great for third-party games for a while, but maybe not. It's, hey, this video chat, voice chat thing is like, who's going to use this? This feature is not for me, whatever. You may have people that are like, they think the mouse control stuff is dumb. Like, there's going to be stuff like that. But at the end of the day, Mario Kart World will probably be a pretty good game. In a, somewhat objective, but like, I can sit here and tell you, like, I don't especially like Mario Kart, but I will tell you that I think that last Mario Kart they put out is like very well made for what it is. I mean, in that sense, like, they're very good at making things that you want to play. And I don't think it necessarily has to be some, like, I don't think you need to overthink it. It doesn't necessarily have to be some big nostalgia play. I think that there will be kids this will be their first Mario Kart game, and they will probably like it quite a bit. There hasn't been like a fucking good Donkey Kong game in, I don't know, when did fucking Donkey Konga 2 come out? Or like Jungle Beat or something. There hasn't been a great Donkey Kong game that wasn't also a weird Konga game since 1994. When that Game Boy game came out. So, but obviously he's a character that's been in a ton of things, and there's certainly some nostalgia associated with Donkey Kong for sure. But like, yeah, they haven't used him in a 3D platformer in a very long time either. So yeah, I don't know. I think that, like, it's a very easy crutch to just go like, oh, it's nostalgia. Oh, it's people who grew up with it. But like, I think that they're making things that kids want to play and that families will want to play. And I think they're making very appealing things at the end of the day. Like, yes, you can, as soon as you pick this apart, as soon as you stare at any of this Switch 2 stuff for longer than 5 minutes, there are a lot of things you look at and go like, God, man. Why does it need to be this way? Why are they doing it like this? Like, this is great. Everything from like, hey, we're updating Zelda to use a phone app, to, hey, we're charging $10 for extra mode here, or extra graphical upgrade, or whatever. I think that there's a lot of stuff like that looks bad and doesn't, and is bad. But at the end of the day, those games will probably be pretty good. People seem very, even the welcome tour thing, which I think is like a dumb, like a just tactically dumb. They can sit there and they can issue the same, the stuff that Bill Trinan said about Mario Kart and welcome tour was almost the same sentence again. It was like, well, we think there's a lot of value in there. We think there's a whole lot of video game in there, and we think it'll basically saying, as a company, we think that, the quality of this game will justify the price, both for the $10 welcome tour and for the $80 Mario Kart. So yeah, I do think that, not every first party game is a fucking banger. And not every first party game is for everyone, right? I think even Nintendo stuff, there's a lot of stuff in there that, it's like, like I've never been a big Metroid Prime fan. I think that 4 looks fine, but whatever. But again, I think that they're making stuff that will probably be worth playing, and that is the draw. You may not like it. You probably don't. You probably shouldn't. You probably should not like the price on this stuff, because again, they are pushing prices in a variety of ways that just seem ridiculous. But at the end of the day, I do think that you could look at that stuff and if your personal financial situation allows it and you really want to play those games, I bet that those games will be a good time. End of story, right? And that's what it all comes back to, right? It doesn't have to be I think people want to overthink this and be like, oh, Nintendo gets a pass because of this and nostalgia and this and that. But like, they're still making things that appeal to kids. And it doesn't necessarily have to just be like parents who are fanatical about Nintendo stuff forcing it on their children either. So yeah, I think it's like a relatively simple proposition. It is cluttered up by the money part of it for sure this time around, because I do think that the stuff that they're trying to pull on the money stuff, even if it makes sense to them based on the quality of the game and what have you, I think that they're pushing it a little out of bounds. Do I think that will affect them financially? Not really. Not in the near term. The tariffs will probably be a larger problem for them on that front. But if we take the existing prices and assume that holds, I don't think this ends up being a big deal. And again, I'll say, as much as we've talked about the initial reveal of a console and whatever, I do think that there's a certain aspect to this that, like, by and large, the initial details of how a console is revealed or whatever don't matter at all. I can think of exactly one case where it has, and it's the Xbox One. Where the information about the Xbox One always online stuff carried and persisted way more than you would have thought. And that it harmed them in the long run. The rest of it, I don't, this is stuff that, like, yeah, sure, millions of people see it, but like when you think about the entirety of the gaming audience and the entirety of the audience that they want to buy a Nintendo Switch to, it's not people who watch that video. Those people were already in the market to buy one anyway. It's just hearing the details, It's the larger people that come holiday season when they can spend a lot of time marketing it in, flashy commercials and everything else that, that's what all this is about. That's where they make the money. That's where it happens for them. And unless people can't afford it, because that's, again, that's a real thing here in a way that it wasn't last time. It wasn't really a consideration the same way it was this time. Like, I think that will be the thing that potentially dogs them, that potentially... I think that, hey, the tariff situation and, hey, we had to raise the price because of this. And I think that in conjunction with them already trying to say, hey, this game's $80, I think that's the stuff that probably dogs them for longer than you might think. Depending, It may be a case that when the tariffs hit, it's like, okay, the games are still going to be the same price, but obviously the console has to change. And, that's a... We'll see. Jeff from Toronto writes in and says, I first learned of you from your appearances on Jeff Keighley's Bonus Round, which is a show that he did, I think, for game trailers back in the day. It was like semi-regular kind of talk show thing where Keeley would get some guests and he would talk to them about stuff. And usually when, around GDC or something, they would be filming an episode in San Francisco or whatever. And so, since I was local at that point and they were filming one there, I would pop by. I think I went down to LA for one or two of them also, but generally speaking, it's also where I learned of many other gaming luminaries. My question is, why did David Jaffe always seem so angry? I'll take these questions as they come. There's more. But why did David Jaffe always seem so angry? Jaffe was never angry in that scenario. It was like he was like relatively outspoken in that specific way. And I think that he also realized, I think that there was an aspect of it of he was sort of putting on a show. I remember I was on one of those with Jaffe and Dennis Dyack. And I think we recorded it in some weird bar around the corner from our office. It was in San Francisco during GDC. And there was someone else on there. I don't remember exactly who. And I remember recording it, and then after the fact, I think, Dennis Dyack was turned Jaffe and was like, how come you can say all this shit and you don't get it? If I say any of this stuff, I get shit for days on the internet, but everyone, it was like kind of giving him some good-natured shit about it. And the answer was that, Jaffe was kind of playing it up. He was kind of like not saying that he was being not himself or anything, but he was just a more dynamic person on camera than Dennis Dyack was. And he had built that reputation the same way like Joseph Ferris comes on the Game Awards and gives him the finger and he curses, like there's a caricature aspect of that I think works in a public setting. And I think that, David Jaffe was well aware of how some of that stuff worked. And he played into it a little bit. But again, I'm not saying he was fake in any way or phony. It was just like, he's just being himself and shooting the shit and doing it in an affable enough way that no one was going to shit on him for it. And so I think that worked out well for him. But David Jaffe is never angry is not the word I would use to describe David Jaffe back in those days. I don't know what he's up to these days, but yeah, that's kind of how I always, he was just kind of always that guy. Okay, next question. Why did Shane Satterfield always seem so grumpy? Shane's not grumpy. Shane's from Philly. If that makes any sense. That makes sense to me. But no, Shane's I would not characterize Shane Satterfield as grumpy. But he is from Philly and he's a real dude. That's what I would say. Is Shane Satterfield is always, if I had to come up with like words to describe him, who, if you don't know, he worked at GameSpot for a while and then he was behind the scenes at G4 for a while, and then he was like running all of editorial at G4, I think, before they shut down, if I remember right. So this would have been around that era in kind of conjunction with a lot of that stuff. No, I don't know. Like Shane Shane always struck me as a very straight shooter in a way that like I, always kind of associated with like when I would meet people from Philly, it's a bluntness, but not a grumpiness or anger or anything like that. It's a, again, straight shooter kind of guy is what I would say about Shane. Do I have any interesting or funny stories from your appearances on those shows? Probably just that one. That was also walking to that show with Dennis Dyack is where he said that his favorite character class wasn't into human yet. We were walking to record that bonus round. Is where I heard him say that. Somewhere around there is also, I think, where this might have been after this had to have been after I was done at GameSpot, but I remember running into Jaffe. It might have been for that. That might have been after the fact, but anyway. He started, a lot of people, especially in this era, and this still happens to a certain extent, but it's a little different now. People were very happy to talk shit about GameSpot to me because they would think that is exactly what I wanted to hear as someone who was no longer there. Whereas, like, it was obviously the reality of that was much more murky because I had a ton of friends who were still there, and there was, it's a very weird thing. But that's, people would happily talk shit about GameSpot to me all the time. And so he starts in. He's like, yeah, man, I fucking, when Calling All Cars came out, they fucking did all that. They said all this. Like, he was complaining to me about the Calling All Cars review, which was a game that he did for PSN, a downloadable, I guess, PS3 game. Like, fuck those guys. They're, I can't believe they did this is my game and this and that. I didn't have the heart to tell him. I didn't want to fucking start the fucking shit. So I just kind of went like, yeah. I was there when that review ran. I assigned that review. That review was sent to me. I read it and went like, yeah, this game's not good. And then we ran the review. It was not. So it's just like, fuck those guys. Like, yes, indeed. Indeed, fuck those guys, Jeff. So yeah, it was funny. That was not a great game. It was better than Drawn to Death, but what are you gonna do? Let's see here. Chop writes in and says, do you know if Nintendo has a red team that tries to hack the Switch 2? I'm curious what their plan is to combat piracy with the Switch 2. Does Nintendo have a history of hiring hackers to help prevent future problems? I don't know anything specifically about Nintendo's efforts on that front. You would like to think that based on how things went last time, that they would be taking a lot of this stuff more seriously. I have to assume, if you remember, the big problem with the previous Switch is that there was just straight up a backdoor on that chip that Nvidia left in there. There was a backdoor to get into like whatever bootloader mode or whatever it needed to be. And so it was a problem at that level that was very hard to solve. Yeah, that's right. They are on HackerOne. So they do some bounty stuff. They do some bounty stuff on HackerOne, to where you can report exploits to them and instead of releasing them publicly, and they will fix them and they will pay you. They got burned pretty bad. Not necessarily on the sales front. The Switch has been a very successful platform for them, but I think they got burned worse than anyone else on the piracy front this time around. The story with the Switch 1, especially getting that thing getting to a point where you didn't even need the real actual hardware to run the games because people were emulating it in the middle of its run. And I think that's a huge black eye for them. I think it's something that they absolutely want to combat. Obviously, they've been combating that in a variety of ways over the last year and change, through courtrooms and such. But the you can't unring the bell. You can't unopen the barn door. Whatever. The situation had already happened. Obviously, when they started revising the hardware, they fixed the problem that the launch models had, but they sold a lot of those things. And so there was already kind of a wide open thing. And you see some of this stuff, and I hate it. But I saw some of this stuff last week during the thing as people and they're just being these like smug, I can't wait to play these games on PC. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Go fuck yourself. Jesus Christ. That stuff may happen this time around. I don't know. We'll see what happens with security this time around. And will they do a better job or whatever? I do think that some of the stuff they've walked into with pricing and everything else is probably put a bit of a target on their back from people, and also the legal the legal wrangling they did will certainly not win them friends, but also the legal wrangling they did is why a lot of the scene around that stuff has been so decimated. Everyone thinks like, oh, just there's more forks of these emulators and you can't put it back in the box. Like, there aren't as many people working on them, and they aren't working on them as quickly, and they aren't working on them as it's like work on that type of stuff has slowed down big time. Not just for Switch, but for 3DS as well, because that stuff got hit pretty hard too. I think that, it's a factor of all of this. It's kind of a byproduct of all of this. I think emulation is a really fascinating and fucking radical, cool thing. But I tend to think about it as an after the fact thing. And in a general sense, I've kind of always felt this way because it gets a little too close to piracy, and I think it's fucking gross. It's not a great situation. Like it was weird when you could play N64 games on a PC while the N64 was still coming out. Like that felt crazy at the time. It felt weird when Neo Geo games were getting dumped like the week before they were released somehow, and that they ran perfectly in like weird builds of MAME. That the MAME team had to come up with some rules about, hey, we don't want to have games that are this new in the emulator. It just brings too much negative attention, and we don't want to fucking deal with it. And so, there have been a number of situations like this over the years, and I don't think it's great. I think that a lot of the Switch emulation stuff is like it's interesting in a sense, but like I'm not going to care about that stuff for another like 10 years, like minimum. Because it's just like it's not that interesting to me. From a I like playing those games for the first time, especially as someone who covers games. Like there's zero value in me only playing a game in that weird fucked up way, and then like the nightmare scenario, right, that I'm sure some fucking podcaster somewhere ran into, is that they play a game on an emulator, complain about something, and then it turns out, oh, by the way, the real game on a real Switch doesn't have that problem. That's not a good place to be. Not a good place to be. So yeah, I don't know, man. I think that stuff, it's interesting that stuff happens. I think it's conceptually really cool that people can run those games in, higher resolution in the same way you can do with PS3 games and whatever. Like I think that stuff's neat. But I have like almost zero interest in it, other than like keeping tabs on it and keeping an eyeball on it and like, is this stuff still progressing? Like what's happening over here? But like in terms of like going and finding those games and doing that, like, no, man, I don't want to fucking dick around with that stuff really. Too much. It's just not, I don't know. It's just not that interesting. And I think that, like the conversation around Switch 2 and the number of people who just assumed like, oh, well, this is going to happen because it happened on the Switch. I think that they're being a little presumptive. But again, all of that comes down to what did Nintendo and Nvidia learn about last time around, and what have they done to, try to make that more difficult. Mod chips will happen, right? Like someone's eventually, someone's going to buy one of these region locked Switch 2s, and they're going to figure it out, right? They're going to figure out a way to buy the cheap Switch and unlock it so that it runs all region games. I think by making that move, they have set up a scenario where someone's very much going to try to do that. And, along the way, we'll see what happens, right? I mean, I think that people are always interested in kind of poking at this stuff and seeing if they can hack it and seeing what happens and what have you. And I don't know where that will lead. I would suspect that they've done a better job of protecting the device this time, but You never really know until that thing's out in the wild and you've got people actually banging on it. So we'll see. But yeah, I suspect that they do have people poking at that thing internally. If they didn't before, they almost certainly do now. Yes, they do have bounties and stuff like that that they use to try to encourage people out there in the wild to report the exploits directly to Nintendo instead of releasing them publicly. And we'll see where that all ends up. I think it would be a real shame if this was just a repeat of last time in terms of how that stuff goes. Like, I always think it's very interesting when a console can be soft modded because it opens things up in a way that, like, is fascinating. You know, like, it was fun to run RetroArch on a Switch and, you know, like some of these other, you know, like, I think that some of that stuff is very neat. Especially if you can do it without having to install a mod chip and go through the weird hardware route, which is how it ended up happening. I think after they fixed stuff, they closed whatever backdoor was in it. I think that became, like, you had to actually physically install a thing like it was the frickin' early 2000s. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to say it won't happen because that's, you know, like, you never know. Like, I think that there are probably people who are incentivized to really try to take a look at it for those reasons. I think that the idea of emulating a Switch 2 on a PC will obviously be a different set of challenges than it was last time around, just from the hardware, you know, capability standpoint, but also, you know, Nintendo has shown that they are willing to scare the shit out of you if you were out there fucking around with their stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were a little more, if they at least tried to be, even though I don't necessarily think they have a leg to stand on when it comes down to it. That's not going to stop them from trying to force the issue. And try to settle with people or try to find weird loopholes where it's like, oh, I mean, yeah, maybe, you know, because Nintendo loves to claim, hey, that stuff's illegal. But they've never taken that part of it to court, and I don't know that part would stand up, but I ain't a lawyer. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thanks everybody for writing in. What do you think? Do you think that Switch 2s will be up for pre-order by the time we reconvene next week? Or is it going to take longer? We'll have to wait and see what happens at midnight tonight and see what rolls out from there and how it goes. But I don't. If they maintain that they're going to start selling these things in, you know, like the first week of June, they're going to have to figure that out pretty soon. Be back next week. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll play some video games. But the podcast will be back next week. Head over to patreon.com/Jeff Gerstmann. You get an ad-free version of this show and some hot bonus content. Polygonal feet up over there. If you want the hot stuff. Anyway, I will see you tomorrow. Have a good one. Take care.